My lazy wife won a lottery worth $73 million. Then she kicked me out saying, "Disappear," and vanished from the face of the earth. I don't care. You're useless now. Days later, the lottery company's lawyer laughed. Did you even read the terms and condition? My wife went pale because the terms said, you know that moment when your whole damn world flips upside down faster than a pancake on a Sunday morning? Yeah, well, mine happened on a Tuesday night while I was sitting in my raggedy lazy boy, nursing a beer that cost more than I wanted to admit, watching some mindless reality TV about people whose biggest problem was choosing between a yacht or a private jet. Real relatable stuff, right? The lottery drawing was on in the background, just white noise, really. Clarissa had been buying tickets religiously for 3 years, convinced that someday her lucky numbers would hit big. Lucky numbers, my ass. They were the dates we got married, her birthday, and some random crap she claimed came to her in a dream. I used to tease her about it, calling it her retirement plan, but after working double shifts at Martinez Auto Repair for the past 4 years, scraping together enough cash to keep our heads above water, I'd stopped finding it funny. Hell, I'd stopped finding much of anything funny. Then it happened. Oh my God. Oh my God. Darian. Clarissa's voice cut through the apartment like a fire alarm at 3 in the morning. She was standing in front of the TV, clutching that crumpled piece of paper like it was the Holy Grail, shaking so hard I thought she might vibrate right through the floor. The numbers. The numbers. I looked up from my beer, annoyed that she was interrupting the one moment of peace I'd had all week. What numbers, Clarissa? What are you? $73 million, she shrieked, and I swear to God, every dog in a 3-block radius started howling. Darian, we're rich. We're fucking rich. Now, let me tell you something about my wife Clarissa Monroe. Well, Clarissa Monroe Hayes, though she'd been dropping the Hayes part more and more lately. She's got a flair for the dramatic that would make Broadway actors jealous. The woman once cried for 20 minutes because Starbucks was out of pumpkin spice syrup. So when she started jumping around our living room like she'd just won the Super Bowl, my first instinct was skepticism wrapped in a thick layer of here we go again. But then I saw her face. Really saw it. The color had drained out completely, leaving her looking like she'd seen a ghost, and her hands were trembling so violently that the lottery ticket was making a sound like autumn leaves in the wind. This wasn't one of her usual performances. This was something else entirely. Let me see that, I said, setting down my beer and getting up from my chair. My knees creaked. Too many hours bent over car engines, too many years of living paycheck to paycheck, too many nights wondering if we'd make rent this month. She handed me the ticket, and I looked at the numbers on the screen, then at the ticket, then back at the screen. Holy shit. Holy actual shit. The numbers matched. Every single goddamn one of them. Jesus Christ, Clarissa, I whispered, sinking back into my chair because my legs suddenly felt like they were made of jello. This is real. It's real, she screamed, doing some kind of victory dance that looked like she was having a seizure set to music. We're millionaires, Darian. Millionaires. I wanted to believe it was our miracle. God knows we needed one. After 7 years of marriage that felt more like a prison sentence with good behavior, after working myself into the ground fixing other people's cars while mine sat in the driveway held together with duct tape and prayer, after watching Clarissa spend money we didn't have on clothes she didn't need, while I ate ramen noodles for lunch 6 days a week, maybe, just maybe, life was finally cutting us a break. We celebrated that night like we were 21 again. Ordered pizza from Tony's, the good stuff, not the cardboard crap from the gas station, and I even splurged on a bottle of champagne. Well, champagne-flavored wine product. Close enough. Clarissa was already on her phone, posing with the winning ticket like it was her newborn baby, uploading photos to Instagram with captions like, "Dreams do come true," and "blessed beyond measure." I paid for the pizza, naturally. Some things never change, even when you're holding a ticket worth more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. That's when I noticed her brother Marcus lurking in the corner like a vulture circling roadkill. The guy had showed up about an hour after Clarissa's Instagram post. Funny how fast news travels when money's involved. He was whispering in her ear, pointing at the ticket, making gestures I couldn't quite read. Something about the way he was smirking made my stomach turn, but I pushed the feeling down. This was supposed to be a celebration, right? Our big break. Our chance to finally stop worrying about every damn dollar. Marcus thinks we should get a lawyer, Clarissa said, glancing over at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You know, to handle all the legal stuff. Smart, I said, taking a sip of the fake champagne and trying to ignore the fact that it tasted like carbonated grape juice mixed with regret. We'll definitely need help with taxes and investments and all that. Marcus laughed, this low, ugly sound that reminded me of nails on a chalkboard. Oh, there's going to be a lot of changes around here, he said, not looking at me. A lot of changes. I should have paid more attention to that comment. I should have asked what he meant. But I was too busy staring at that lottery ticket, too busy calculating how many double shifts I'd never have to work again, too busy imagining a future where I didn't have to choose between fixing the dishwasher and buying groceries. The doorbell rang around 10 o'clock, and Clarissa's mother Eleanor swept in like she owned the place. Which, given that I'd been paying rent for the past 3 years while Clarissa found herself, wasn't entirely inaccurate. Eleanor Monroe was the kind of woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and perfume that cost more than my monthly car payment. She kissed Clarissa on both cheeks, because apparently regular hugs were for peasants, and immediately started talking about mansions and yachts and European vacations. Not once did she look at me. Not once did she acknowledge the husband who'd been keeping her daughter's lights on and her fridge stocked while she spent her afternoons scrolling through designer catalogs and complaining about how boring her life was. I stood there holding the champagne bottle like some kind of butler, listening to Eleanor plan our future without consulting me about any of it. The first thing you need to do is find a proper financial advisor, Eleanor said, settling into my chair like she'd paid for it. Someone who understands how to handle serious money, not like those discount brokers who advertise on late-night television. Clarissa nodded eagerly, hanging on every word like her mother was dispensing wisdom from Mount Olympus instead of the same bullshit advice you could get from any financial planning website. What about property? Should we start looking at houses? Houses? Eleanor laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. Darling, with $73 million, you're looking at estates. Compounds. Properties with names, not addresses. I cleared my throat. Maybe we should slow down a bit. You know, take some time to figure out what we really want before we start making big decisions. Both women turned to look at me like I'd just suggested we donate the money to charity and move into a cardboard box. Eleanor's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. Of course, she said in that tone rich people use when they're pretending to be polite. How thoughtful. But her eyes said something different. Her eyes said I was an obstacle to be removed. I told myself the money might soften her heart. I told myself that once the shock wore off, once we got used to the idea of being wealthy, things would get better between us. I told myself that $73 million was enough to fix whatever had gone wrong in our marriage, enough to make Clarissa look at me the way she used to, back when I was her hero instead of her burden. I was wrong about all of it. But that night, standing in our crappy apartment with pizza grease on my fingers and fake champagne bubbling in my glass, watching my wife pose for selfies with our winning lottery ticket while her mother planned our new life and her brother whispered secrets in the corner. That night, I still believed in miracles. I should have known better. Miracles, it turns out, come with terms and conditions. And I was about to learn them the hard way. 3 days. That's how long it took for my fairy tale to turn into a goddamn horror movie. 3 measly days between, we're rich, honey, and get the hell out of my life. If that's not some kind of record for going from hero to zero, it should be. I woke up that Thursday morning thinking maybe we'd finally talk about our plans like actual married people. You know, sit down with some coffee, maybe even splurge on the good stuff from that fancy place downtown, and figure out how 2 broke-ass nobodies were supposed to handle more money than God. Stupid me, right? I was still operating under the delusion that we existed in Clarissa's vocabulary. The first red flag should have been the fact that she wasn't in bed when I woke up. Clarissa Monroe had never seen 9 a.m. from the conscious side in all the years I'd known her. The woman treated sleeping in like it was an Olympic sport she was training for. But there I was, rolling over to find cold sheets and the distant sound of hushed voices coming from the kitchen. I patted down the hallway in my boxers and the ratty Metallica t-shirt I'd been wearing since college, expecting to find her on the phone with some reporter or lottery official. Instead, I found Marcus leaning against my kitchen counter like he owned the place, sipping coffee from my favorite mug, the one that said, "World's okayest husband," that Clarissa had given me as a joke 3 Christmases ago. Funny how that joke wasn't so funny anymore. Clarissa was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, still in the silk pajamas she'd ordered online last week with money we didn't have. Her hair was perfect, her makeup was perfect, and her expression was colder than a Chicago winter. She looked like she'd been up for hours, which was weird because the woman usually needed at least 2 cups of coffee and a motivational speech just to remember her own name in the morning. "Morning," I said, trying to keep things light. "You guys are up early. Everything okay?" That's when they both turned to look at me, and I felt something twist in my gut. You know that feeling you get right before you're about to get fired, or dumped, or told you've got 6 months to live? That sick, anticipatory dread that starts in your stomach and spreads through your whole body like poison? Yeah, that. Marcus didn't say anything, just stood there with that smug little smirk he'd been wearing since Tuesday night. But Clarissa, Jesus, the look she gave me could have frozen hell over. It was like she was seeing me for the first time and finding me lacking in every possible way. "We need to talk," she said, and those 4 words hit me like a punch to the solar plexus. "Okay," I said slowly, glancing between her and her brother. "Should Marcus maybe?" "Marcus is staying," she cut me off. "He's helping me handle some things." "Handle some things. Not us handling some things. Now we need to handle some things." Her handling some things, with her brother's help. I was already being written out of the story, and I was too stupid to see it. We went into the bedroom, our bedroom, though I was starting to get the feeling it wasn't going to be ours much longer. Clarissa stood in the doorway like she was afraid to get too close to me, while Marcus lurked behind her like some kind of designer-wearing gargoyle. The whole setup felt rehearsed, like they'd been practicing this moment. "Darian," Clarissa started, and I could hear her voice shaking just a little. Not with emotion, though, with adrenaline. She was nervous, but not because she was about to break my heart. She was nervous because she was about to do something that required balls, and she'd never been particularly well equipped in that department. "I need you to leave," she continued, the words coming out in a rush like she was afraid she'd lose her nerve if she didn't get them all out at once. I blinked. "Leave? Like, leave the apartment? Are we going somewhere?" Marcus snorted, and Clarissa shot him a look that shut him up. For about 2 seconds. "No, Darian," she said, and now her voice was steadier, colder. "I need you to disappear. Vanish from the face of the earth. I don't care where you go or what you do, but I need you gone." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I actually took a step backward, like her voice had physical force behind it. "What the hell are you talking about, Clarissa? Are you having some kind of breakdown?" "You're useless now," she said, and Jesus Christ, the casual way she said it was somehow worse than if she'd screamed it. Like it was just a fact, as obvious as saying the sky was blue or water was wet. "I have money. Real money. I don't need you to pay the bills or fix the car or pretend like you're some kind of provider. I can hire people to do all of that, and they'll do it better than you ever could." I felt like I'd been sucker punched. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of working my ass off to keep us afloat, 7 years of believing that we were a team, and she was dismissing all of it like I'd been nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. "This is insane," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "Clarissa, this is our money. We won this together. We're married, for Christ's sake." That's when Marcus decided to chime in. "Actually, bro," he said, drawing out the word bro like it tasted bad in his mouth. "Clarissa bought the ticket. Clarissa picked the numbers. Clarissa's name is on all the paperwork. Far as I can see, this is her money." I stared at him, then at her. "Are you serious right now? Are you actually serious?" Clarissa reached into her purse, the new Louis Vuitton one she'd bought online yesterday with money from our joint account, and pulled out a wad of cash. She tossed it onto the bed like she was tipping a bellhop, and I watched the bills scatter across our comforter like confetti at the world's most depressing party. $500, she said. "That should last you until you figure out your next move. $500. For 7 years of marriage." For all those double shifts, all those nights I came home exhausted and covered in motor oil while she complained about being bored. For every time I chose to fix something myself instead of hiring someone because we couldn't afford it. For every sacrifice I'd made to keep us going. $500 fucking. Marcus was laughing now, not even trying to hide it anymore. "Come on, Clarissa. Don't be cruel. Give the man $1,000. He's been a good little worker bee. That's when something inside me snapped. You piece of shit, I said, taking a step toward him. You think this is funny? Marcus straightened up, and for a second I thought he might actually try to throw hands. But Clarissa stepped between us, and the look on her face stopped me cold. Don't, she said quietly. Just don't. Take the money and go, Darian. Make this easy on both of us. Easy on both of us. Like I was the one making things difficult by existing in my own goddamn marriage. I looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for any sign of the woman I'd married. The woman who used to steal fries off my plate and laugh at my terrible jokes. The woman who cried during Hallmark commercials and made me watch romantic comedies even though we both knew I hated them. The woman who used to tell me I was her best friend, her partner, her everything. She was gone. Maybe she'd been gone for a while, and I'd just been too blind to see it. Maybe she'd never really been there at all, and I'd just been in love with the idea of her. Either way, the person standing in front of me was a stranger wearing my wife's face. 7 years, I said finally. 7 goddamn years, Clarissa. I know, she said, and for just a second, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But then it was gone, replaced by that cold, calculating look she'd been wearing all morning. But that's over now. I nodded slowly, because what else was I supposed to do? Fight for a woman who'd already written me off? Beg someone who saw me as useless to let me stick around? Fuck that. I had more pride than that. Not much more, but enough. I started packing while they watched from the doorway. 2 suitcases and a shoebox of photos. That's what 7 years of marriage boiled down to. Pictures of my parents before the car crash that took them both when I was 22. Photos of Clarissa and me from better times, when she still smiled at me instead of through me. A picture of Richard Hayes, the landlord I'd worked for briefly before the auto shop, shaking my hand after I'd fixed his tenant's plumbing emergency. Darian, you're a good man, he'd told me that day. I'd believed him then. I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. When I zipped up the last suitcase, I turned around to find Clarissa still standing there. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it again. Marcus had disappeared, probably off to celebrate his sister's newfound fortune and single status. Clarissa, I started, but she shook her head. Just go, Darian. Please. So I did. I picked up my 2 suitcases and my shoebox of memories, left the $500 scattered on the bed like the insult it was, and walked out of the apartment I'd been paying for since we moved in together. She didn't follow me. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, to hear her voice calling my name, to hear some sign that maybe she'd realized what she was throwing away. But the only sound was the echo of my footsteps in the hallway and the distant hum of traffic outside. 7 years, gone in a sentence. And the worst part? I was starting to think she'd been planning this longer than I wanted to admit. The Sunrise Motel was about as far from actual sunrise as you could get without traveling to the dark side of the moon. The neon sign flickered like it was having a seizure, missing half the letters so it read Sun ISEMOL in sickly pink light that made everything look like it was dying of some exotic disease. The parking lot was cracked asphalt held together by weeds and broken dreams, populated by cars that had seen better decades and a few that looked like they'd been abandoned since the Clinton administration. $45 a night, cash only, no questions asked. That was the deal Ralph offered when I dragged my sorry ass through the door at 11:30 p.m., looking like something the cat had dragged in and then rejected for being too pathetic. Ralph was the kind of guy who'd probably seen every sob story in the book twice and had stopped caring somewhere around the Bush presidency. The first one. How long you staying? He asked without looking up from his newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, like we were living in 1995. The sports section was open, and I could see he was checking lottery numbers. Because apparently, everyone in this goddamn city was obsessed with winning money they didn't deserve. Not sure, I said, sliding 2 20s and a 5 across the counter. Probably just a few days while I figure things out. Ralph glanced at me then, taking in the wrinkled clothes, the 2 mismatched suitcases, and the general aura of a man whose life had just exploded in his face. He'd seen this movie before. Room 14, he said, handing me a key attached to a plastic diamond that probably cost less than the gas I'd used driving here. Checkout's at 11. Ice machine's busted, vending machine eats quarters, and if you hear screaming from room 12, don't worry about it. Margie just has nightmares. Great. A haunted motel room next to a woman with PTSD. This day just kept getting better. Room 14 was exactly what you'd expect from a place that charged $45 and probably hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. The wallpaper was peeling in strips that looked like dead skin, revealing patches of drywall underneath that were stained with God knows what. The carpet was brown. Not originally, I suspected, but life had a way of making everything brown eventually. It squished slightly under my feet, and I decided I really didn't want to know why. The bed dominated the room like a sagging monument to every broken promise ever made. The mattress had a depression in the middle that suggested the last guest had been roughly the size and weight of a small elephant, and the comforter was one of those generic motel patterns designed to hide stains while simultaneously creating new ones. I sat down on the edge and immediately sank about 6 inches, like the bed was trying to swallow me alive. Which, honestly, didn't sound like the worst option at that point. The bathroom was a masterpiece of despair. The shower had more mold than a college dorm room. The toilet rocked when you sat on it, and the mirror was cracked in a spider web pattern that made my reflection look like a cubist painting of depression. I splashed some water on my face and immediately regretted it when I realized the water smelled like sulfur and had a slight brown tint. I lay back on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling where someone had thoughtfully carved, "Life sucks, and then you die," into the acoustic tiles. Probably with a butter knife, judging by the jagged edges. Inspiring stuff. Really set the mood for what was turning out to be the longest night of my life. The walls in this place were about as thick as tissue paper, so I got to enjoy the full surround sound experience of my fellow guests' personal dramas. To my left, some couple was having the kind of fight that starts with accusations about who forgot to buy milk and ends with someone threatening to burn down everything the other person holds dear. To my right, someone was watching what sounded like a game show at full volume, with occasional bursts of applause and some host with an annoyingly cheerful voice asking contestants to come on down. And above me, someone was apparently practicing for the World Bowling Championship using furniture instead of bowling balls. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine Clarissa in whatever 5-star hotel she'd probably booked by now. Probably ordering room service champagne and laughing with Marcus about how easy it had been to get rid of me. Maybe she was already planning her new life. The mansions Eleanor had been talking about, the yachts, the European vacations. Maybe she was on the phone with some real estate agent, describing her dream house without any mention of the husband who'd made it all possible. The husband she'd called useless. That word kept bouncing around my skull like a pinball, hitting every insecurity I'd ever had and lighting them up like a Christmas tree. Useless. After 7 years of working my ass off to keep us afloat, after all those double shifts and side jobs and nights spent fixing everything in our apartment because we couldn't afford to hire someone else. After choosing her happiness over mine so many times I'd forgotten what mine even looked like. Useless. Maybe she was right. What good was I, really? I fixed cars for a living. Not exactly a glamorous profession. I didn't have a college degree, didn't speak multiple languages, didn't know the difference between good wine and the stuff that came in a box. I was just some blue-collar schmuck who'd gotten lucky enough to marry up, and now that she didn't need me to pay the bills, what was the point of keeping me around? My phone buzzed. For a split second, my heart jumped, thinking maybe it was Clarissa calling to apologize, to say she'd made a mistake, to ask me to come home. But it was just a notification from our bank. Sorry, her bank now, letting me know that our joint account had been closed and a new account opened in her name only. Efficient. I had to give her credit for that. I turned off the phone and tossed it onto the nightstand, where it landed next to a Bible that looked like it had been through a war and a laminated card advertising discreet companionship with a phone number that had been partially scratched out. The Bible's pages were yellowed and dog-eared, like a lot of desperate people had been looking for answers in this room over the years. I wondered if any of them had found what they were looking for. The couple next door had moved on from accusations about milk to accusations about infidelity, their voices rising and falling like some twisted opera. The woman was crying now, big sobbing wails that cut through the thin walls like knives. The man was shouting back, his voice slurred with alcohol or exhaustion or both. I found myself listening despite myself, caught up in their drama because it was easier than dealing with my own. At least they were fighting. At least they still cared enough to scream at each other. Clarissa hadn't even bothered to raise her voice when she destroyed my life. She delivered the news like she was reading the weather report, calm, cool, and completely detached from the devastation she was causing. That's when something started gnawing at me. A tiny voice in the back of my head that refused to be silenced by self-pity and cheap motel despair. Something about the whole situation didn't add up. Not the lottery win itself. That was real enough. I'd seen the numbers with my own eyes. But something about the way Clarissa and Marcus had handled everything afterward. The whispering, the secrecy, the rushed timeline. Clarissa had never been one for reading fine print. Hell, the woman couldn't be bothered to read the instructions on a frozen dinner, let alone the terms and conditions on a multi-million-dollar lottery ticket. She was the type who clicked "I agree" without scrolling through anything, who signed contracts without reading them, who bought extended warranties on everything because the salesperson smiled at her. But she'd been waving that ticket around like she owned the world, talking about claiming the money like it was already hers. Never once mentioning terms, conditions, or legal requirements. Never once suggesting we should read through the paperwork together or consult a lawyer about the best way to handle things. Marcus, on the other hand, had shown up awfully fast after her Instagram post. And he'd been whispering in her ear ever since, filling her head with ideas about lawyers and legal stuff and changes. What kind of changes? And why was he so interested in helping his sister suddenly? The same Marcus who'd borrowed $300 from us last Christmas and never paid it back, who only called when he needed something, who'd spent most of our wedding reception hitting on the bridesmaids. I sat up on the Saga mattress, ignoring the way it creaked like a haunted house. That spark of suspicion was growing brighter, cutting through the fog of heartbreak and self-doubt like a lighthouse in a storm. Maybe I was grasping at straws. Maybe I was just looking for some way to make sense of how quickly my life had fallen apart. But something felt wrong about the whole thing. Really wrong. And if there's one thing 7 years of fixing cars had taught me, it's that when something feels wrong, it usually is. You learn to trust that feeling when you're dealing with machinery. That little voice that tells you the engine sounds off, that the brakes feel spongy, that something's not right even when everything looks fine on the surface. Right now, that voice was screaming. I grabbed my phone and turned it back on, ignoring the 17 new notifications from apps I didn't care about. The Lottery Commission had a website. They had rules, regulations, fine print that nobody ever bothered to read. If I was going to spend the night in this hellhole anyway, I might as well do something productive with my insomnia. Outside, the neon sign flickered again, casting pink shadows across the walls like some kind of diseased aurora borealis. The couple next door had finally exhausted themselves, their fight dissolving into the kind of angry silence that's somehow worse than screaming. The game show host was still cheerfully encouraging people to make terrible decisions for money. And I was about to start reading lottery regulations like my life depended on it. Because maybe, just maybe, it did. The next morning, I woke up in that godforsaken motel room feeling like I'd been hit by a truck driven by my own stupidity, then backed over for good measure. My neck was twisted into some kind of pretzel shape from sleeping on what I can only assume was a mattress stuffed with broken dreams and concrete blocks. But for the first time since Tuesday night, I had something resembling a plan. And let me tell you, having a plan when you're living in a place that charges by the hour feels like finding a $20 bill in your old jeans. I counted the crumpled bills in my wallet, $37 and change, which was just enough to get me downtown and maybe grab a cup of coffee that didn't taste like it had been filtered through a gym sock. The bus fare was $2.50 each way, which left me with about $32 to work with. Living large, baby. The ride downtown took 45 minutes through the armpit of the city, past pawn shops and payday loan places and billboards advertising personal injury lawyers with names like Hurt, call Bert. Real classy stuff. I sat in the back, trying not to think about how I'd gone from having a wife and a home to riding public transportation with my worldly possessions stuffed into a backpack that had seen better decades. The State Lottery Commission building was exactly what you'd expect from a government office that dealt with people's dreams on a daily basis. All glass and chrome, and the kind of sterile corporate aesthetic that said, "We take your money very seriously, but we'd rather not deal with you personally." It was the kind of place where hope went to get processed through bureaucratic machinery and came out the other side as tax revenue. I walked through the automatic doors into a lobby that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never experienced joy and wanted to make sure nobody else did either. Everything was white and gray and beige, the kind of color scheme that made you want to check your pulse to make sure you were still alive. There were motivational posters on the walls featuring happy families holding oversized checks, which felt like a particularly cruel joke given my current circumstances. The receptionist looked like she'd been sitting behind that desk since the lottery was invented, wearing the kind of smile that came with her paycheck and disappeared the moment she clocked out. Her nameplate said, Brenda, and Brenda looked like she'd rather be literally anywhere else doing literally anything else. Can I help you? She asked in the tone of someone who really hoped the answer was no. I need to see someone about a lottery claim, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. My wife won $73 million. Brenda's expression didn't change, which told me she'd heard every sob story in the book and had stopped caring somewhere around the Carter administration. Congratulations. Do you have your claim number? That's the thing, I said, feeling sweat start to gather under my arms despite the Arctic air conditioning. I don't think she filed it correctly. We're married, and I think there might be some legal issues with how she handled the paperwork. Now that got Brenda's attention. She looked up from her computer screen and really saw me for the first time. The rumpled clothes, the desperate expression, the general aura of a man who'd been sleeping in a place that rented rooms by the hour. What kind of legal issues? She asked, and I could hear the wheels turning in her head. This was either going to be entertaining or a complete waste of her time, and she was trying to figure out which. Marriage law stuff, I said, because honestly, I wasn't entirely sure what kind of legal issues they might be. I just knew that something felt wrong about the whole situation, and I was hoping someone smarter than me could figure out what. Brenda stared at me for a long moment, then picked up her phone. Charles, I've got someone down here you might want to talk to. Says his wife filed a lottery claim incorrectly. She paused, listening. Yeah, he looks exactly like what you'd expect. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in an elevator that played the kind of music that made you question your life choices, heading up to the legal department. The doors opened on the 7th floor, and I found myself face to face with a hallway lined with offices where people in expensive suits made more money in a month than I'd made in the past year. Charles Whitmore's office was at the end of the hall, behind a door that had his name etched in gold letters that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The man himself was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd clawed his way to the top of the government food chain. Silver hair that looked like it had been styled by angels, a suit that probably cost more than my car, and eyes that had seen every scheme, scam, and sob story in the book. He was on the phone when I knocked, gesturing for me to sit down while he finished what sounded like a conversation about tax implications and investment strategies. I sat in a chair that was more comfortable than my bed at the motel and tried not to look like I was about to steal something. So, Charles said when he hung up, leaning back in his chair and studying me like I was a particularly interesting specimen in a jar. Brenda tells me you think your wife made some mistakes on her lottery claim. Maybe, I said, because suddenly I felt like an idiot for being there. I don't know. Something doesn't feel right about the whole thing. Charles laughed. Not a mean laugh, but the kind of laugh that suggested he'd heard this exact story more times than he could count. Let me guess. Your wife won the lottery, decided she didn't need you anymore, and kicked you out. Now you're hoping there's some legal loophole that'll get you back in the game. I felt my face burning. It's not like that, isn't it? Charles asked, but his tone wasn't cruel. If anything, he sounded almost sympathetic. How long have you been married? 7 years. Kids? No. Joint bank accounts? Yeah. I mean, we did. She cleaned them out. Charles nodded like he was checking boxes on some internal list. And when did she file the claim? I don't know exactly. Sometime in the past few days, I guess. She kicked me out Wednesday morning, and by then she was already talking about mansions and yachts like the money was already in the bank. That's when Charles's expression changed. The amused, seen it all look disappeared, replaced by something sharper, more focused. He leaned forward in his chair, suddenly very interested in what I had to say. She kicked you out Wednesday morning, he repeated slowly. And she was already talking about the money being available? Yeah. She and her brother were making all these plans, talking about financial advisors and property managers and all this stuff like they'd already figured out how to access the money. Charles was quiet for a long moment, just staring at me with those sharp lawyer eyes. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder that looked like it could choke a horse. "Did you ever read the terms and conditions for the lottery?" he asked. "No. I mean, Clarissa bought the tickets. I never really paid attention to that stuff." Charles slid the folder across the desk toward me. "You should have." I opened the folder and immediately felt like I was drowning in legal jargon. Pages and pages of tiny print that talked about everything from tax obligations to claim procedures to residency requirements. But Charles reached over and flipped to a specific page, pointing to a section that was highlighted in yellow. "Read that," he said. I squinted at the text, trying to make sense of the legal language. And there, buried in a paragraph that would have put a philosophy professor to sleep, was a sentence that made my heart start pounding like a bass drum at a rock concert. Any prize over $50 million must be claimed jointly by spouses unless legally separated prior to the draw date. I read out loud, my voice barely above a whisper. Charles nodded. "That's right. Joint claim. Both spouses have to sign off on it. Both spouses are entitled to equal shares, and both spouses are equally responsible for taxes and legal obligations." I stared at him, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. So if she filed the claim without me, then she committed fraud, Charles finished. Federal fraud, to be specific. The kind that comes with prison time and massive financial penalties. I felt like someone had just told me I'd won the lottery all over again. Except this time it was even better because this time it came with a side order of justice served ice cold. But she already filed. The money's already. "The money isn't going anywhere," Charles interrupted. "Claims this large don't get processed overnight. There are background checks, verification procedures, waiting periods. The earliest she could see a dime would be 6 weeks from the filing date, and that's if everything was filed correctly. Which, based on what you're telling me, it wasn't." He picked up his phone and dialed an extension. "Maria? I need you to pull the file on the Monroe claim. $73 million jackpot from Tuesday night." He paused, listening. "Yes, that one. Bring it to my office." He hung up and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You might be smarter than you look." "I'm definitely prettier," I said, which earned me another laugh. "We'll see about that when we're done with your wife." Maria turned out to be a paralegal who looked like she could bench press a filing cabinet and enjoyed every minute of her job. She brought in another folder, this one even thicker than the first, and spread the contents across Charles's desk like she was dealing cards at the world's most expensive poker game. "Monroe, Clarissa," Maria said, consulting her notes. "Filed Wednesday morning. Claimed single status. Listed no dependents or joint financial obligations." Charles looked at me. "Were you married on Tuesday night when the drawing took place?" "Yeah. Still am, technically." "Joint financial obligations? Joint bank accounts, shared property, anything like that?" "Everything. The apartment lease is in both our names. We've had joint checking and savings accounts for 5 years. She's on my health insurance. I'm the beneficiary on her life insurance policy. We're about as legally entangled as two people can get." Charles and Maria exchanged a look that made me think of sharks smelling blood in the water. "Maria," Charles said slowly, "please tell me you have surveillance footage of Ms. Monroe filing her claim." Maria grinned like Christmas had come early. Full HD video, complete with audio. She was very emphatic about being single and having no financial obligations to anyone else. I felt something that might have been hope blooming in my chest for the first time since Tuesday night. "So what does this mean?" Charles leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers like a movie villain who'd just realized his master plan was coming together. "It means, my friend, that your wife has just handed you the biggest gift of your life. She's committed lottery fraud, perjury, and probably half a dozen other federal crimes I haven't even thought of yet. And that means you don't just have rights to half that money. You have power, real power, the kind that comes with being able to send someone to federal prison for the next decade." I sat there for a moment, letting that sink in. Clarissa had called me useless. She'd thrown me away like yesterday's garbage, confident that her $73 million made her untouchable. She was about to learn just how wrong she could be. "So what's our next move?" I asked. Charles smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made me glad he was on my side. "We're going to introduce your wife to the concept of consequences. And if we do this right, she's going to lose everything she tried to steal." For the first time in 4 days, I felt like I could breathe again. Turns out sometimes the people who think they're untouchable are just setting themselves up for a longer fall. Charles wasn't done dropping bombshells on me, which was good because I was starting to develop a taste for having my entire worldview rearranged every few minutes. He picked up his phone again and dialed another extension, this time with the kind of grin that suggested he was about to introduce me to someone who would either save my life or scare me into an early grave. "Rosa? You busy?" he said into the phone, leaning back in his leather chair like a man who was thoroughly enjoying his work. "I've got a case that's right up your alley. Lottery fraud, arrogant spouse, probably some money laundering thrown in for good measure." He paused, listening to whatever Rosa was saying on the other end. "Yeah, it's exactly as entertaining as it sounds. Can you come up here?" He hung up and looked at me with the expression of a man who'd just called in the cavalry. "You're about to meet Rosa Delgado, the best private investigator in the state and probably the smartest person in this building. She specializes in financial fraud cases, and she has a particular fondness for taking down people who think they're too clever to get caught." "Is she expensive?" I asked, because let's face it, my current net worth was somewhere in the neighborhood of $32 and a half-eaten pack of gum. "She works on contingency for cases like this," Charles said, "which means she doesn't get paid unless we win. And trust me, Rosa doesn't take cases she can't win." 5 minutes later, the door opened, and in walked a woman who looked like she could arm wrestle a grizzly bear and win by submission. Rosa Delgado was maybe 5'6" in her sensible shoes, but she carried herself like someone who'd never met a problem she couldn't solve with the right combination of brains, persistence, and sheer bloody-minded determination. Her handshake could have cracked walnuts, and her eyes had the kind of sharp intelligence that made me feel like she was reading my entire life story just by looking at me. "So you're the poor bastard whose wife tried to steal $73 million, she said by way of introduction, settling into the chair next to mine like she owned the place. "Charles, fill me in on the basics." "Your wife's an idiot. Her brother's probably the brains of the operation, and they think they're smarter than the legal system." "Did I miss anything?" "Her mother's involved too," I said. "Eleanor Monroe. She showed up the night we won, already making plans like she was going to be managing the money." Rosa's eyes lit up like I'd just told her Christmas was coming early this year. "A family conspiracy. Even better. The more people involved, the more mistakes they make, and the easier it is to prove intent to defraud." She pulled out a tablet and started typing notes with the speed of someone who'd been doing this for a very long time. "Tell me everything about Tuesday night. Every detail, every conversation, every look that seemed off. People always think they're being subtle when they're planning to screw someone over, but they're usually about as subtle as a brick through a window." So I told her everything. The lottery drawing, Clarissa's reaction, Marcus showing up like he'd been waiting for the call, Eleanor arriving in her pearls and perfume, and immediately taking charge of our financial future. The whispered conversations, the way Marcus kept smirking at me, the way Clarissa started talking about her money instead of our money almost immediately. Rosa listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making notes, but mostly just absorbing everything I said like a sponge soaking up water. When I finished, she sat back and looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "Your wife's been planning this for a while," she said matter-of-factly. "The logistics alone, knowing who to call, what forms to file, how to structure the claim to exclude you, that's not something you figure out in 3 days. She's been thinking about this scenario, probably for months." That hit me like a punch to the gut, because it meant Clarissa hadn't just been waiting for an excuse to leave me. She'd been actively planning for it, fantasizing about a future where I didn't exist. Every time she bought a lottery ticket, she'd been imagining what she'd do when she won, and apparently, what she'd do was throw away 7 years of marriage like it had never happened. "The good news," Rosa continued, "is that arrogant people make stupid mistakes, and your wife seems to have cornered the market on both arrogance and stupidity. Charles showed you the legal requirements for joint claims." "Yeah, she had to file jointly, and she didn't. Right? But that's just the beginning. If she really filed a false claim, if she really stated she was single and had no financial obligations, then she didn't just break lottery rules. She committed perjury on a federal document, which is a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison. And if she tries to access that money based on false information, that's wire fraud, which can get you 20 years. Charles leaned forward. "The question is proving intent. We need to show that she knew she was lying when she filed the claim, not that she just made an honest mistake. Oh, that's the easy part, Rosa said with a grin that would have made a shark nervous. Give me 48 hours, and I'll have enough evidence to bury her in court documents. These people always think they're the first ones to come up with these schemes, but they never are, and they never learn from other people's mistakes. She stood up and started pacing around the office like a general planning a military campaign. First, I'm going to pull all the surveillance footage from the Lottery Commission. Every camera, every angle, every second of your wife filing her claim. If she looked nervous, if she hesitated when answering questions, if she had coaching materials with her, I'll find it. What kind of coaching materials? I asked. Notes, printouts of legal advice, text messages with instructions from her brother. Trust me, amateurs always leave a paper trail. They can't help themselves. She made another note on her tablet. Second, I'm going to pull her bank records for the past 6 months. If she's been planning this, there will be evidence. Payments to lawyers, research into lottery law, maybe even practice runs with smaller amounts. Charles nodded approvingly. What about the brother and mother? Oh, they're next on my list. Marcus Monroe has a business degree but no visible means of income, which tells me he's either trust fund trash or he's working angles that won't look good under scrutiny. And Eleanor Monroe. Rosa paused to check something on her tablet. Eleanor Monroe has a history of litigation against family members. 3 separate inheritance disputes in the past 10 years, all settled out of court. She's got a pattern of trying to manipulate family money, and patterns are exactly what prosecutors love to see. I felt like I was watching a master class in how to destroy someone's life in the most legally satisfying way possible. How long will all this take? The initial investigation? Like I said, 48 hours for the basics. But here's the thing. We don't want to just prove she committed fraud. We want to prove she committed fraud while also being stupid enough to leave evidence everywhere. The more evidence we have, the stronger our position when it comes time to negotiate. Negotiate what? I asked. Charles and Rosa exchanged a look that made me think of wolves deciding how to divide up a particularly juicy deer. Your wife stole $73 million, Charles said. But fraud cases can tie up assets for years while they work their way through the court system. If we play this right, we can get her to agree to a settlement that gives you everything you're entitled to plus damages, in exchange for not pursuing criminal charges that could send her to federal prison. So I get the money and she stays out of jail? If she's smart, yes. If she's stupid, Rosa shrugged. Well, federal prison food isn't that bad, I hear. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and felt my blood pressure spike about 50 points. It was from an unknown number, but the message was clear enough. Saw the news about your lottery win. When can we expect to see you and your beautiful wife on TV for the winner's interview? I showed the message to Charles and Rosa. Rosa read it and started laughing. Not a pleasant laugh, but the kind of laugh that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. Your wife's been doing interviews? She asked. I don't know. I've been staying at a motel, trying to avoid reporters. Rosa was already typing on her tablet. Let's see what the internet has to say about Clarissa Monroe, lottery winner. Her fingers flew across the screen for about 30 seconds. Then she stopped and grinned like she'd just found buried treasure. Oh, this is even better than I hoped. She turned the tablet around so Charles and I could see the screen. There was Clarissa, standing in front of our apartment building, being interviewed by a local news crew. She was wearing the new outfit she'd bought online, probably with money from our joint account, and holding up the winning lottery ticket like it was the Declaration of Independence. I've always believed that hard work and positive thinking pay off, she was saying to the reporter, with the kind of sincere expression that actors spend years learning to fake. This money is going to change my life completely. I plan to travel, maybe start a business, really live the life I've always dreamed of. And what about your husband? The reporter asked. How is he handling this incredible stroke of luck? Clarissa's expression flickered for just a second, so fast you'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. But Rosa was looking for it, and she caught it like a baseball scout spotting a future Hall of Famer. I'm recently single, Clarissa said smoothly. This is really a fresh start for me in every way. Charles whistled low. She just lied on television about her marital status. In front of witnesses. While holding the lottery ticket, she fraudulently claimed. Gets better, Rosa said, still scrolling through the search results. Look at this. She'd found another interview, this one from yesterday, where Clarissa was talking about her plans to buy a mansion and start a charitable foundation. In this one, she specifically says she's been single for over a year and that this one validates her decision to focus on herself instead of supporting other people. I stared at the screen, watching my wife of 7 years tell the world that she'd been single for over a year, supporting other people. Like I was some kind of charity case she'd finally gotten tired of funding. Can we use this? I asked. Can we use this? Rosa repeated, looking at me like I'd just asked if water was wet. Darian, your wife just committed perjury on camera, in front of thousands of witnesses, while providing clear evidence of her intent to defraud the lottery system. This isn't just evidence. This is a prosecutor's wet dream. She stood up and started gathering her things. I'm going to get started on this right now. Charles, can you pull the original claim documents and get them copied for me? Already on it, Charles said, reaching for his phone. Rosa headed for the door, then stopped and turned back to me. Darian, I want you to do exactly what you've been doing. Stay at the motel, keep a low profile, don't contact your wife or her family. Let them think they've won. Let them get comfortable. The more confident they get, the more mistakes they'll make. And then, she grinned, and I finally understood why Charles had looked so pleased when he called her. And then we're going to teach your wife that stealing $73 million is easy. Keeping it when you've broken half a dozen federal laws in the process? That's the hard part. After she left, I sat in Charles's office for another hour, going over the legal implications of everything we'd discovered. By the time I left, my head was spinning with terms like criminal conspiracy and asset forfeiture and federal sentencing guidelines. But for the first time since Tuesday night, I felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Clarissa had called me useless, but she'd forgotten one important thing. Sometimes the people you throw away know exactly where all the bodies are buried. And sometimes, they're friends with people who know how to dig them up. 5 days. That's how long it took for Clarissa to go from kicking me out of our crappy apartment to living like some kind of discount royalty in a mansion that probably cost more per month than I'd made in the past year. Rosa had been tracking her every move through social media, bank records, and what I can only describe as professional-grade stalking, so I knew exactly where to find her when Charles finally gave me the green light. The house was in Belmont Hills, the kind of neighborhood where people had names like Thurston and Muffy, and thought poor people were just rich people who weren't trying hard enough. It was one of those modern monstrosities with more glass than a greenhouse and enough marble to supply a small cemetery. The kind of place that screamed, I have money and I want everyone to know it, in architectural form. I stood at the front door holding Charles's injunction in one hand and a set of keys in the other. Keys that had been issued by court order after Rosa's investigation had turned up enough evidence to choke a horse. My heart was pounding like I'd just run a marathon, but for the first time in a week, it wasn't from despair. It was from anticipation. The doorbell played some kind of classical music that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Through the glass, I could see Clarissa pacing around what looked like a living room the size of a basketball court, gesticulating wildly while talking on her phone. She was wearing clothes I'd never seen before, designer stuff that probably cost more than my car. When she saw me through the glass, her face went through about 6 different expressions in 2 seconds flat. Surprise, confusion, anger, and finally settling on the kind of rage usually reserved for people who'd just been told their favorite TV show had been canceled. She yanked open the door so hard I thought she might pull it off its hinges. What the hell are you doing here, Darian? Living in my house, I said, pushing past her into the foyer that was roughly the size of our old apartment. She followed me, sputtering like a broken lawn sprinkler. Your house? Are you insane? This is my house. I'm renting it with my money. Actually, I said, pulling out the injunction, according to this court order, it's our house. Rented with our money. You know, the money you try to steal from me. The phone call she'd been having apparently involved screaming at some jeweler about a custom necklace, because I could hear a tiny voice on the other end saying something about payment processing issues and declined transactions. That's when it happened. The beautiful, perfect moment I'd been waiting for all week. I'm sorry, ma'am. The voice on the phone said, loud enough for me to hear, but your credit card has been declined. All of your credit cards, actually, and your bank accounts appear to be frozen. Clarissa's face went through the color spectrum like a mood ring having a seizure. Red to white to green, and back to red again. She looked at her phone like it had just told her the world was ending. "You're lying," she whispered into the phone. "Check again. Check all of them." But I was already opening the folder Charles had given me, pulling out copies of the court orders that had frozen her accounts, her credit lines, and basically every financial resource she thought she had access to. Rosa had been busy, little b, and her investigation had given the court everything they needed to lock down Clarissa's fraudulent empire faster than you could say federal crime. "Clarissa," I said, trying to keep my voice level even though I wanted to do a victory dance on her marble floors, "we need to talk." She hung up the phone and turned to look at me with the kind of expression you'd see on someone who'd just realized they were standing in a minefield. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said, which was technically true. "You did this all by yourself when you decided to commit lottery fraud." That's when she started laughing. Not the good kind of laughing, but the kind that suggested someone had finally snapped and was now operating on pure panic and desperation. "Lottery fraud? Are you out of your mind? I won that money fair and square. Those are my numbers, my ticket, Our ticket," I interrupted. "Our numbers. Our money. We were married when you bought that ticket, Clarissa. Legally married. Which means legally, half of everything belongs to me." I opened the folder and pulled out the paperwork that would change both our lives forever. Copies of her claim forms where she'd sworn under penalty of perjury that she was single. Screenshots of her Instagram posts bragging about her single life and my lottery winnings. Bank records showing her attempts to move money into accounts I had no access to. "You signed documents stating you were single," I said, laying them out on her fancy glass coffee table like I was dealing cards. "You lied to federal officials about your marital status. You tried to defraud me out of my legal share of the winnings." Her hands were shaking so badly now that she couldn't hold the paper steady. She kept looking from the documents to me and back again, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that was missing half its pieces. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is my money. I bought the ticket. I picked the numbers. You committed fraud," I said. "Federal fraud. The kind that comes with prison time." That's when Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a chainsaw through butter. "What is all this noise about?" Clarissa's mother swept into the room wearing the kind of outfit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, her pearls clicking together like a rosary made of arrogance. She took one look at me standing in her daughter's stolen mansion, and her expression could have frozen hell over. "You," she said, pointing at me like I was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "What are you doing in my daughter's home?" "Reading her the charges," I said, holding up the last document in the folder. "Would you like to hear them? Lottery fraud, perjury, attempted money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud. The list goes on." Eleanor's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the fact that all the color had just drained out of her face. She looked at Clarissa, then at the papers scattered across the table, then back at me. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked its usual commanding tone. "You can't just come in here and—" "Actually, I can," I said, pulling out the keys. "Court order. This house, these accounts, all of it is frozen until the investigation is complete. And since I'm the legal co-owner of the lottery winnings, I have every right to be here." I looked around the room at the expensive furniture, the artwork that probably cost more than I'd made in the past 5 years, the champagne glasses still sitting on the counter from whatever celebration they'd been having before I arrived. "Nice place you've got here," I said. "Too bad it's all paid for with stolen money." For the first time since I'd walked through that door, Clarissa was completely speechless. And for the first time in a week, I felt like I could breathe again. 2 nights later, I was sitting in what used to be Clarissa's stolen mansion, drinking what used to be her overpriced scotch, and reading what used to be her copies of Architectural Digest, when the front door burst open like someone was staging a home invasion. The sound of Eleanor's heels clicking across the marble foyer was like machine gun fire, and I knew I was about to have the conversation I'd been both dreading and looking forward to since this whole mess started. Eleanor Monroe swept into the living room like a one-woman hurricane, her pearls rattling with barely contained fury and her perfume arriving a full 5 seconds before she did. Behind her, Clarissa skulked like a scolded teenager who'd been caught shoplifting and was hoping her mommy could make all the bad consequences go away. "You," Eleanor said, pointing one perfectly manicured finger at me like she was casting a curse, are going to fix this situation immediately. I looked up from my magazine. An article about sustainable kitchen designs that cost more than most people's cars, and tried not to smile. The past 48 hours had been a masterclass in watching privileged people discover that money couldn't actually solve every problem, especially when that money had been obtained through federal crimes. "Evening, Eleanor," I said, taking a sip of scotch that probably cost more per ounce than I used to make per hour. "Nice to see you too. Can I offer you a drink? I'm afraid it's your daughter's scotch, but since it was purchased with stolen money, I figure it's community property now." Eleanor's face went through several interesting color changes. "How dare you speak to me that way? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? A woman whose daughter is facing federal fraud charges?" I suggested. "A woman who was present during the planning stages of said fraud? A woman who might want to start thinking about hiring a good criminal defense attorney." That got her attention. Eleanor had always been the kind of person who thought rules were suggestions that applied to other people, but the word criminal seemed to penetrate even her titanium-plated sense of entitlement. Clarissa finally found her voice. "Mother, maybe we should." "Quiet," Eleanor snapped, not taking her eyes off me. "Adults are talking." She reached into her purse, a bag that probably cost more than I used to make in 3 months, and pulled out a checkbook bound in leather that looked like it had been harvested from unicorns. The kind of checkbook that belonged to people who paid for things like politicians and Supreme Court justices. $2 million, she said, placing the checkbook on the coffee table with the ceremony of someone laying down a royal flush. "To make this whole misunderstanding disappear." I looked at the checkbook, then at her, then back at the checkbook. "Misunderstanding? That's what this is," Eleanor said, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining basic mathematics to a small child. "A misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. Clarissa made some paperwork errors, you overreacted, and now we need to fix it before it becomes a real problem." I picked up the checkbook and opened it. The balance showed more zeros than I was comfortable counting. Old money. The kind of money that had been accumulating interest since before the Civil War and buying influence since before electricity was invented. $2 million, I said thoughtfully. "That's a lot of money, Eleanor." For the first time since she'd stormed in, she looked relieved. "It certainly is. More money than you've ever seen, I'd imagine. Enough to set you up for life, buy a nice house, maybe start that business you've always talked about." The problem was, I never talked about starting a business. Eleanor was making the classic rich person mistake of assuming that everyone else's dreams involved money, because money was the only thing she understood. I tore the check in half. Eleanor's mouth fell open like someone had just told her the stock market had been canceled. What are you doing?" "Rejecting your bribe," I said, dropping the pieces into the empty scotch glass. "Let me make this clear, Eleanor. Your daughter didn't make a paperwork error. She committed fraud. Federal fraud. The kind that comes with prison time and orange jumpsuits." Eleanor's hands were shaking as she wrote another check. $5 million, she said, her voice higher now, more desperate. $5 million to walk away and forget any of this ever happened. I took that check and tore it up too. The sound of expensive paper ripping seemed to echo through the room like thunder. "Are you insane?" Eleanor shrieked. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? Do you have any idea what you're trying to cover up?" I shot back. "Your daughter tried to steal $36.5 million from me. She lied to federal officials. She documented her crimes on social media like she was proud of them. And you think a few million in hush money is going to make that disappear?" That's when Eleanor's mask finally slipped completely. The polite, condescending tone disappeared, replaced by something uglier, more desperate, and infinitely more dangerous. "You stupid little man," she hissed, leaning forward like a snake preparing to strike. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. My family has connections in this city that go back generations. We have friends in government, friends in law enforcement, friends in places you can't even imagine." She stood up and began pacing around the room like a caged animal, her heels clicking against the marble with increasing agitation. "We can make your life disappear," she continued, her voice getting louder and more unhinged with each word. "Tax audits that go on for years. Building inspections that find violations you never knew existed. Background checks that discover irregularities in your employment history. We can bury you so deep in legal problems that you'll spend every penny of that lottery money just trying to stay out of prison. Clarissa was staring at her mother with something that might have been horror. Mother, maybe you shouldn't. Shouldn't what? Eleanor snapped. Shouldn't protect my family from this parasitic little gold digger who's trying to destroy our lives. She turned back to me, her eyes blazing with the kind of fury that comes from a lifetime of getting her way and suddenly discovering that the universe doesn't actually revolve around her bank account. That lottery money will rot in court for years before you ever see a penny of it, she snarled. We'll tie it up in litigation until you're too old to spend it. We'll challenge every document, question every signature, appeal every ruling. By the time we're done with you, the legal fees alone will bankrupt you. For a moment, just a moment, doubt crept into my mind. What if she was right? What if people with her kind of money and connections really could make the legal system work for them? What if I was just a naive working-class schmuck who'd stumbled into a game I didn't understand? But then I remembered Charles Whitmore's confident smile and Rosa Delgado's predatory grin. I remembered the stack of evidence they'd compiled, the surveillance footage, the social media posts, the financial records. Most importantly, I remembered the law, clear, ironclad, and completely on my side. You know what, Eleanor? I said, standing up and walking to the window that overlooked her daughter's stolen paradise. You're absolutely right about one thing. You do have friends in high places. The problem is, federal lottery fraud is prosecuted by the FBI, not your local buddies. I turned back to face her, and for the first time in this entire conversation, I felt completely calm. Charles Whitmore has been dealing with people like you for 30 years, I continued. Rosa Delgado has put millionaires in federal prison for less than what your daughter did. And the beautiful thing about federal court is that your country club connections don't mean shit when you're standing in front of a judge who's sworn to uphold the law. Eleanor's face had gone completely white under her expertly applied makeup. You're making a mistake, she said, but the fight had gone out of her voice. A terrible mistake. No, I said. Your daughter made the mistake. You made the mistake by trying to cover it up. And now you're both going to live with the consequences. I walked to the front door and held it open. I think it's time for you to leave, Eleanor. And don't bother coming back with another checkbook. The next time we see each other, it'll be in federal court. As they walked past me toward the door, Eleanor paused and looked at me one last time. You'll regret this, she said quietly. I promise you that. Maybe, I said, but not as much as your daughter's going to regret lying to the FBI. After they left, I poured myself another glass of scotch and sat back down in the living room that would probably be mine for the foreseeable future. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Eleanor Monroe had just threatened to destroy my life with her money and connections. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. Sometimes the people you think are powerless turn out to have the most powerful weapon of all, the truth. Rosa Delgado called me the next morning with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for people who'd just discovered buried treasure in their backyard. Darian, honey, please tell me you recorded that conversation with Eleanor last night. No, I said, immediately regretting every life choice that had led to that moment. Was I supposed to? Rosa's sigh was loud enough to wake the neighbors. Sweetie, if Eleanor Monroe threatened you the way I think she did, we just missed the biggest gift-wrapped piece of evidence since she started documenting her crimes on Instagram. That's when Charles Whitmore's voice came through the speaker. Apparently, they were tag-teaming this call like some kind of legal wrestling match. Don't worry about it, Darian. We're going to give them another chance to hang themselves. What do you mean? We're going to wire your living room, Charles said, like he was suggesting we order pizza. Professional-grade surveillance equipment, FBI-approved recording devices, the whole 9 yards. Then we're going to let Eleanor and Clarissa know you're ready to negotiate. The plan was so beautifully simple it felt like cheating. Rosa would coordinate with Agent Sylvia Martinez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Apparently, Rosa had made some friends during her 12 years of putting rich assholes in federal prison. They'd set up surveillance equipment that could record a whispered confession from 3 rooms away, then sit back and wait for the Monroe family to come over and incriminate themselves. These people are arrogant enough to think they can threaten a federal witness in his own home, Rosa explained as she supervised the installation of equipment that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. We're just going to give them the rope and let them hang themselves with it. Agent Martinez turned out to be a woman who looked like she could interrogate terrorists before breakfast and enjoy every minute of it. She was maybe 40, with the kind of steady eyes that suggested she'd seen every type of criminal stupidity imaginable and had stopped being surprised by any of it. The beautiful thing about rich people, she said while testing microphone levels, is that they think money makes them untouchable. So when they get desperate, they get sloppy. And when they get sloppy, they say things that put them in federal prison for a very long time. The surveillance van was parked 3 houses down, disguised as a cable repair truck complete with magnetic signs, and a guy in coveralls who looked like he'd been fixing cable problems since the Reagan administration. Inside, Rosa and Agent Martinez would be monitoring every word, recording every threat, and building a case that would make Eleanor Monroe wish she'd stayed home and counted her money instead of trying to intimidate witnesses. Right on schedule, at exactly 7 p.m., Eleanor's Mercedes pulled into the driveway like a shark arriving for a feeding frenzy. Through the hidden cameras, I could see her in the passenger seat, gesticulating wildly, while Clarissa drove with the kind of white-knuckled grip that suggested she'd rather be literally anywhere else. They came to the door carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than my old car, and Eleanor was wearing the kind of expression that suggested she was about to negotiate the purchase of a small country. "Darian," Eleanor said when I opened the door, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "we need to talk." I led them into the living room, where hidden microphones were picking up every breath, every whisper, every incriminating word. Eleanor set the briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with the ceremony of someone revealing the Holy Grail. Inside were documents, legal papers, and what looked like enough cash to buy a decent house. Eleanor pulled out a thick folder and spread its contents across the table like she was dealing cards at the world's most expensive poker game. "These are tax documents," she said, pointing to papers that looked official enough to fool a casual observer. "Evidence of irregularities in your employment history. Proof that you've been defrauding the government for years." I stared at the papers, knowing that Rosa and Agent Martinez were listening to every word from their van down the street. "These are fake." "Are they?" Eleanor asked, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Try proving that in federal court while you're being audited by the IRS and investigated for tax evasion." Clarissa was sitting beside her mother like a scared child, occasionally glancing at the briefcase and then at me, like she couldn't decide whether to run or throw up. "Here's what's going to happen," Eleanor continued, pulling out more documents. "You're going to sign these papers, which transfer your claim to the lottery winnings to my daughter. In exchange, we'll make these tax problems disappear and give you $5 million to start fresh somewhere far away from here." She leaned forward, her perfume choking me, her eyes cold as winter. "Take the money, Darian. Take it and disappear before we make your life a living hell. And if I don't," Eleanor's mask finally dropped completely, "then we'll destroy you. We have friends in the IRS, friends in law enforcement, friends who can make sure you spend the next decade fighting charges that will bankrupt you and ruin your life. That lottery money will sit in court while you rot in federal prison for tax evasion." She stood up and walked around the coffee table until she was standing directly over me, her voice dropping to a whisper that the hidden microphones captured perfectly. "We'll make sure your life is ruined," she hissed. "Your credit, your reputation, your freedom, we'll take it all away from you. By the time we're done, you'll be begging us to take the lottery money just to make the pain stop." That's when the front door burst open and Agent Martinez walked in wearing an FBI jacket and the kind of smile that suggested Christmas had come early. "Eleanor Monroe," she said, holding up her badge, "you're under arrest for extortion, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The sound of handcuffs clicking was like music to my ears. Eleanor's face went from predatory confidence to absolute terror in less than 2 seconds, while Clarissa just sat there making sounds like a broken air conditioner. "You set us up," Eleanor whispered as Agent Martinez read her rights. "Actually," I said, watching as more FBI agents filed through the door, "you set yourselves up. I just gave you the stage to perform on." As they led Eleanor and Clarissa away in handcuffs, Rosa poked her head through the door and grinned at me like a proud parent watching their kid graduate from college. "Not bad for a guy who used to fix cars for a living," she said. You just helped us record enough evidence to put these people away for the next decade. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The federal courthouse looked like the kind of building where justice wasn't just served. It was delivered with a side of marble columns and enough gravitas to make even hardened criminals reconsider their life choices. I sat in the gallery behind the prosecution table, watching Charles Whitmore and Agent Martinez prepare to destroy what remained of the Monroe family's dignity with the efficiency of a surgical strike team. 3 months had passed since the arrests. 3 months of watching Clarissa and Eleanor's legal team try to build a defense out of smoke, mirrors, and increasingly desperate motions to dismiss. Their lawyer, some overpaid suit named Hamilton Prescott III, looked like he'd rather be defending anyone else for anything else, including war crimes and puppy theft. Clarissa sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed spectacularly with her complexion, while Eleanor wore the kind of designer outfit that cost more than most people's cars, but couldn't hide the fact that she'd aged about 10 years in 3 months. Both of them kept glancing back at me like they were hoping I'd spontaneously combust and solve all their problems. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Chun, had the kind of reputation that made defense attorneys wake up in cold sweats. She'd been putting white-collar criminals behind bars for 20 years and had apparently never met a fraud case she couldn't see through like plastic wrap. The prosecution will present its opening statement, Judge Chin announced, and Charles stood up with the confidence of a man who was about to shoot fish in a barrel with a nuclear weapon. Your Honor, Charles began, this case is about greed, arrogance, and the mistaken belief that money makes you above the law. The defendants didn't just commit lottery fraud, they documented it, celebrated it, and when caught, tried to threaten their way out of it. He gestured toward a screen where Rosa had compiled a greatest hits collection of Clarissa's Instagram posts. There she was, posing with the lottery ticket and declaring herself single and winning. There she was again, celebrating with her real family after kicking out her toxic husband. And there she was signing papers for her single girl mansion with money she'd obtained through fraud. The defendants created a digital evidence trail. Charles continued. That reads like a how-to guide for committing federal crimes. Then came the recordings from the night Eleanor had tried to bribe and threaten me. The jury listened in fascination as Eleanor's voice filled the courtroom, clear as a bell, threatening to destroy my life unless I signed away my legal rights to the lottery winnings. We'll make sure your life is ruined, Eleanor's recorded voice promised. Your credit, your reputation, your freedom, we'll take it all away from you. One juror actually shook her head in disgust. Another looked like he was taking notes for his memoir titled, Rich People Are Terrible. Hamilton Prescott III stood up for the defense looking like a man who'd been asked to perform brain surgery with a butter knife. His opening statement was a masterpiece of desperation disguised as legal strategy. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, my clients made mistakes. Paperwork errors. Misunderstandings about complex legal requirements. But mistakes are not crimes, and misunderstandings are not conspiracy. It was like watching someone try to explain away a bank robbery by calling it an unauthorized withdrawal with aggressive customer service issues. The prosecution's case took 2 days to present and felt like watching a perfectly choreographed demolition. Rosa testified about the financial evidence. Agent Martinez explained the surveillance operation, and Charles walked the jury through federal lottery law with the patience of a kindergarten teacher explaining why we don't eat crayons. The defense case took about 4 hours and consisted mainly of character witnesses who testified that Eleanor had always been a pillar of the community and Clarissa had never intentionally hurt anyone. It was like trying to stop a freight train with a strongly worded letter. During cross-examination, Charles destroyed their expert witness, some consultant who tried to argue that the lottery forms were ambiguously worded, so thoroughly that the man looked like he wanted to change his name and move to another country. But the moment that really sealed their fate came when Clarissa took the stand in her own defense. Against her lawyer's obvious wishes, she tried to explain how she'd misunderstood the requirements for filing lottery claims. I thought that since I bought the ticket with my own money, she said, it was my lottery ticket. Charles stood up for cross-examination with the expression of a shark who'd just spotted a wounded seal. Mrs. Monroe Hayes, he said, emphasizing the hyphenated name. You were married to Mr. Hayes on the night of the lottery drawing, correct? Yes, but... And you used money from your joint bank account to purchase the ticket? Well, technically, but... And when you filed your claim, you checked the box marked single, correct? I was confused about. Mrs. Monroe Hayes, did you or did you not check the box marked single while legally married to my client? Clarissa looked at her lawyer, who was making the kind of face people make when they're watching a car accident in slow motion. Yes, she whispered. I'm sorry, could you speak up for the jury? Yes. Clarissa snapped. Yes, I checked the single box. But I didn't know it was illegal. Charles smiled. Thank you. No further questions. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes, which I'm pretty sure was just long enough to elect a foreman and figure out how to fill out the paperwork. When they returned, the foreman stood up and delivered the verdicts with the solemnity of someone announcing the weather. On the charge of lottery fraud, we find the defendant Clarissa Monroe guilty. On the charge of perjury, we find the defendant Clarissa Monroe guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant Clarissa Monroe guilty. Eleanor's charges took a little longer to read, mainly because Rosa had been thorough enough to charge her with everything from extortion to witness intimidation to conspiracy to obstruct justice. By the time the foreman finished reading, Eleanor looked like she'd been hit by a truck carrying a load of karma. Judge Chin scheduled sentencing for the following month, but she gave us a preview of coming attractions right there in the courtroom. Mrs. Monroe Hayes, she said, looking at Clarissa with the expression of someone who'd just found something unpleasant on the bottom of her shoe. You will be sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. Clarissa started crying, but not the pretty movie star kind of crying. The ugly, snotty kind that happens when reality finally catches up with you. Mrs. Monroe, Judge Chun continued, turning to Eleanor. You will be sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for extortion and witness intimidation, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Eleanor didn't cry. She just sat there staring straight ahead, like someone had just told her the sun was never going to rise again. As the bailiffs led them away in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not happiness, exactly. I was still too angry for that. But satisfaction. Pure, crystalline satisfaction that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe actually made sense. Charles shook my hand in the hallway afterward. Congratulations, he said. You just helped put away 2 people who thought money made them untouchable. Rosa punched my shoulder hard enough to rearrange my internal organs. Not bad for a guy who fixes cars, she said. You just proved that sometimes the little guy wins. As I walked out of that courthouse, I couldn't help but smile. Clarissa had called me useless, but I just helped send her and her mother to federal prison. Turns out I was pretty useful after all. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of what used to be Clarissa's stolen mansion, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and redemption. The house was officially mine now. Court-ordered restitution for emotional distress and legal fees. Turns out federal judges don't appreciate lottery fraud, especially when it's documented on Instagram like a how-to guide for idiots. The mansion had been transformed from Eleanor's gaudy monument to excess into something that actually felt like home. Gone were the crystal chandeliers that looked like they'd been stolen from Liberace's garage sale. Gone were the marble statues of cherubs that seemed to judge you for existing. In their place was furniture you could actually sit on without feeling like you were defiling a museum exhibit. But the real transformation wasn't in the house. It was in what I'd done with the money. The Monroe Foundation for Fair Play occupied 3 floors of a downtown building that had once housed a payday loan operation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Charles Whitmore served as our legal counsel, Rosa Delgado ran our investigations department, and I got to play the role I'd always been best at, the guy who fixed things that were broken. We'd helped Grace Bennett, a widow whose in-laws had tried to steal her husband's life insurance money through forged documents. We'd taken on the Ortiz family, whose siblings had used fake signatures to steal their childhood home. Every case reminded me of that night Clarissa had looked me in the eye and called me useless. The mail still brought weekly letters from Clarissa, pathetic, rambling apologies that started with, "I've had time to think," and ended with, "I know we can work this out." I'd stopped reading them after the 15th one. Some mistakes don't get do-overs, and federal fraud is definitely one of them. Eleanor's letters were shorter and infinitely more entertaining. Demands for forgiveness from someone who'd once offered me $5 million to disappear. The woman who'd threatened to destroy my life was now begging for my mercy from a federal prison cell. I kept them in a folder labeled "Karma is a Beautiful Thing." Every evening, I did exactly what I was doing now. Stood on this balcony with a glass of good whiskey, watching the lights come on across the city. Sometimes I thought about the night Clarissa had told me to vanish from the face of the earth. How she'd called me useless. How she'd thrown $500 at me like I was a bellhop she wanted to forget. The lottery had given me $73 million, but more importantly, it had given me something I'd never had before, the absolute certainty of my own worth. Not the kind of worth that comes from a bank account, but the kind that comes from knowing you can take a hit that should have destroyed you and come back swinging. Clarissa had been wrong about everything, but she'd been especially wrong about one thing. I wasn't useless. I was the guy who'd turned her moment of greed into a foundation that helped people fight back against exactly the kind of entitled bullshit she and her family had tried to pull. The city lights twinkled below like stars that had decided to come down to earth and party. Somewhere out there, Clarissa was probably counting days until her release, planning her next scheme, dreaming of the life she'd thrown away for money that was never really hers. And somewhere else, Grace Bennett was sleeping in a house that was legally hers again, thanks to lawyers who didn't charge by the hour. That's the thing about true worth. It's not something you win in a lottery. It's something you prove when everything goes to hell and you refuse to stay down. Clarissa had called me useless, but I'd built something that would outlast both of us. And that, it turned out, was worth more than all the lottery money in the world. I forgot to tell my wife I had called a technician to fix the company's security camera. When I accidentally checked the footage, I was horrified to uncover a dark secret about my wife and my male personal assistant. 10 minutes later, the worst happened. So there I was, living what I thought was the American dream. You know, the one they sell you in those glossy brochures with the perfect house, the perfect spouse, and the illusion that everything's under control. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. But on that particular Thursday, I was still blissfully unaware that my life was about to become a reality TV show I never auditioned for. I'm Graham Cole, 38 years old, and co-owner of Harper & Holt Consulting, a mid-sized firm that specialized in making other companies look like they had their crap together. The irony of that wouldn't hit me until later, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. My business partner, Richard Harper, handled most of the client-facing stuff because he had that natural charisma that made people trust him with their money. Me? I was the behind-the-scenes guy, the one who actually made sure the ship didn't sink while everyone else was busy taking Instagram photos on the deck. And then there was Lydia, my wife of 7 years, the woman I'd pledged my eternal devotion to in front of 200 witnesses and an open bar that cost more than my first car. Lydia ran our HR department, which she took very seriously, perhaps a little too seriously, if you ask me. She treated employee conflicts like they were geopolitical crises and somehow managed to turn every staff complaint into a 3-act drama complete with PowerPoint presentations and action items. I used to joke that she should have been a UN negotiator instead of an HR director, but she never found that funny. Lydia didn't find most of my jokes funny, actually, which should have been my first red flag. But hindsight's 2020, right? The office itself was your standard corporate setup. Gray cubicles, motivational posters that nobody actually found motivating, and that one printer on the 3rd floor that jammed every single time you were in a hurry. We had about 45 employees spread across 3 floors of a building in downtown Seattle, and somehow, we'd managed to convince ourselves we were making a difference in the world. The coffee was mediocre, the AC was always either too cold or not cold enough, and Sharon from accounting microwaved fish in the break room at least twice a week, despite the multiple passive-aggressive notes taped to the microwave. This was corporate America in all its beige-colored glory. For the past few weeks, we'd been dealing with a security camera situation that was driving me absolutely insane. The system had crashed during a power surge back in July, and since then, about half our cameras were basically just expensive decorations mounted on the walls. I'd brought it up in 3 separate management meetings, each time suggesting we get them fixed immediately. But Lydia, in her infinite wisdom and her obsession with quarterly budgets, kept pushing it back. "We'll handle it next quarter, Graham," she'd say. waving her hand dismissively like I was suggesting we install a gold-plated fountain in the lobby. It's not a priority right now. We need to focus on the Henderson account. The Henderson account. I was so sick of hearing about the damn Henderson account. Sure, they were worth about $2 million annually, but I'm pretty sure our building could have been actively on fire and Lydia would have said, "We'll deal with it next quarter. We need to focus on Henderson." So I did what any rational, slightly frustrated husband would do. I went behind her back and fixed the problem myself. I found Victor through a buddy of mine who worked in building security downtown. Victor was this quiet, efficient guy in his 50s who showed up with a toolbox that looked like it could rebuild the International Space Station. He assessed our system in about 20 minutes, gave me a quote that was surprisingly reasonable, and had everything up and running within 2 days. The man was a magician. Every camera was now operational. The feeds were crystal clear. We're talking HD quality that could probably pick up on someone's existential crisis from 50 feet away. And he even upgraded our storage system so we could keep footage for 90 days instead of 30. The funny thing, and by funny I mean the thing that would later make me want to bang my head against every wall in the building, is that I completely forgot to tell Lydia the cameras were fixed. It wasn't intentional, really. I'd been swamped with the Morrison proposal. We'd had that emergency client call about the data breach simulation, and somewhere between answering 87 emails and trying to remember if I'd paid the water bill at home, mentioning the cameras just slipped my mind. Plus, there was a petty part of me, a small, childish part that I'm not particularly proud of, that enjoyed having fixed the problem she kept deprioritizing. I figured I'd casually mention it at some point, maybe drop it into conversation like, "Oh yeah, by the way, those cameras you said weren't a priority? Fixed them 3 weeks ago. No big deal." That Thursday started like any other. I dragged myself out of bed at 6:15 after hitting snooze twice, shuffled through my morning routine on autopilot, and listened to Lydia complain about how the new intern, some kid named Tyler or Trevor or something equally forgettable, kept formatting his reports wrong. I nodded in all the right places while internally wondering if it was too early to start drinking. We had coffee together in our kitchen that was featured in some home design blog once, which Lydia brought up at every dinner party like it was her greatest achievement. She was wearing this navy blue pantsuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her perfume, some designer brand I couldn't pronounce, smelled like what I imagined luxury and tax evasion would smell like if they had a scent. "Big day today," she said, scrolling through her phone while her coffee went cold. "I've got back-to-back meetings until at least 7. Another late night?" I asked, trying not to sound as annoyed as I felt. This was becoming a pattern lately. Late nights, weekend, emergencies, urgent calls that she had to take in the other room. But I chalked it up to her being dedicated to her job. Lydia was nothing if not dedicated. "Just how it is during performance review season," she replied without looking up. "You know how it gets." I did know. Or at least, I thought I did. Performance review season was always hectic. Lots of meetings with employees, documentation, uncomfortable conversations about productivity and goals. It made sense. Everything made sense. That's what I kept telling myself. We drove to work separately. She had some early morning thing with the department heads, and I had to stop by the post office to mail some contracts. When I got to the office around 8:30, she was already deep in conversation with Damien, my personal assistant. Damien was 26, fresh out of business school, and had that eager-to-please energy that made him both useful and occasionally exhausting. He'd been with us for about 8 months, and I'd honestly thought he was doing a decent job. Organized my schedule, handled client calls when I was tied up, remembered everyone's coffee orders, and never once microwaved fish in the break room, which automatically put him in my top 10 favorite employees. "Morning, boss," he said with that bright smile of his. "Your 9 o'clock, called to reschedule. I moved them to Tuesday at 2. Also, the Patterson files are on your desk, and I updated the Fletcher spreadsheet with the new projections." "You're a lifesaver, Damien," I said, meaning it. See, everything was normal. Everything was fine. Lydia kissed me goodbye around 5:30, right there in the lobby where everyone could see, like we were starring in some commercial for successful marriages. "Don't wait up," she said. "This HR meeting is going to run long. Budget discussions with the senior staff. Want me to bring you dinner?" I offered because that's what good husbands do. "No, we ordered in. I'll probably be home around 10. She kissed me again, and I caught that perfume smell, luxury and tax evasion, and watched her walk back toward the elevators. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We'd been married for 7 years. We owned a business together. We had a mortgage and a joint checking account, and one of those fancy coffee makers that does 17 different types of espresso. You don't question someone you've built a life with, especially when they're wearing a pantsuit and carrying a leather portfolio that screams credibility. I left around 6, stopped at the grocery store to grab ingredients for the stir-fry I'd been craving all week, and spent my Thursday evening exactly like I spent most Thursday evenings, cooking dinner for one, catching up on a documentary about financial fraud that felt oddly appropriate in retrospect, and falling asleep on the couch before Lydia got home. It was completely, utterly, perfectly normal. And that's exactly what made what happened next so spectacularly, devastatingly worse. Friday morning rolled around with all the enthusiasm of a DMV appointment, which is to say I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck made entirely of paperwork and regret. Lydia's side of the bed was already empty. She'd apparently gotten up early for some critical HR thing that couldn't wait, which was becoming her favorite excuse lately. I found a post-it note on the bathroom mirror that said, "Meeting ran late, left early, see you at the office," with a little heart drawn at the bottom. That heart felt about as genuine as a $3 bill. But again, I was still operating under the delusion that my marriage was intact. I got to the office around 7:15, which was early even for me, but I'd slept like garbage and figured I might as well be productive with my insomnia. The building was practically empty. Just me, the security guard who nodded without actually seeing me, and probably Gerald from IT, who I'm pretty sure just lived in the server room at this point. I grabbed my usual coffee from the lobby cafe, a large dark roast that tasted like it had been brewed with the tears of overworked employees, and headed up to my office on the 3rd floor. My office was nothing fancy. Decent view of the parking lot, a desk that I'd inherited from the previous owner, some diplomas on the wall that were supposed to make me look credible, and a bookshelf full of business books I'd bought with every intention of reading but never actually opened. There was a photo of Lydia and me from our wedding on my desk, both of us grinning like idiots who had no idea what the next 7 years would bring. I should have thrown that picture in the trash right then and there, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I settled into my chair, opened my laptop, and started going through the 73 emails that had accumulated since I'd left yesterday. Most of them were the usual corporate nonsense: meeting requests, status updates, someone asking if we could move the quarterly review to Thursday instead of Friday because of scheduling conflicts, which was code for, "I don't want to work late on a Friday." I was about to respond to a particularly passive-aggressive email from accounting when I noticed the security camera software icon on my desktop. Now, here's where my morning took a sharp left turn into hell. I hadn't checked the camera feed since Victor installed the new system 3 weeks ago. There'd been no reason to, really. We weren't having security issues. Nobody was stealing staplers or spray painting profanity in the parking garage, and honestly, I'd just forgotten the thing existed. But something made me click on it that morning. Maybe it was boredom, maybe it was my subconscious trying to save me from years of therapy bills, or maybe the universe just decided that Friday was as good a day as any to completely demolish my worldview. The software opened up with a grid of camera feeds, each one showing a different part of the building: lobby, parking garage, 2nd floor hallway, break room where Sharon was probably already microwaving something that smelled like a crime against humanity. Everything looked normal. Everything looked exactly like it should. And then I saw the timestamp. The system had helpfully bookmarked motion events from the previous evening, because of course it had. Victor's fancy new setup included motion detection software that flagged any activity after hours. There were maybe 15 or 20 clips from last night, mostly cleaning crew, a few people working late, nothing unusual. But one clip caught my eye, timestamped at 8:47 p.m., location tagged as Executive Office 3A. Executive Office 3A was my office. I felt this weird prickle at the back of my neck, that instinctive warning system that evolution gave us to detect predators and bad decisions. My office should have been empty at 8:47 p.m. I'd left at 6. I'd locked the door. I was pretty sure I'd locked the door. Who the hell was in my office at almost 9 o'clock at night? I clicked on the clip with the kind of casual curiosity that you have right before your entire life implodes, like opening an email from the IRS or checking your bank account after a weekend in Vegas. The video loaded, crystal clear HD courtesy of Victor's excellent work, and suddenly I was watching a film I never wanted to see, starring people I thought I knew. There was Lydia, my wife of 7 years, sitting in my office chair. The expensive ergonomic one I'd bought after throwing out my back last year. She was wearing the same navy pantsuit from yesterday, though her jacket was off and draped over the armrest like she'd gotten comfortable. And standing behind her, hands on her shoulders in a way that was definitely not included in his job description, was Damien, my assistant. The kid I'd hired 8 months ago because his resume was impressive and he'd seemed eager and competent. For about 3 seconds, my brain tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe he was giving her a professional shoulder massage because she'd complained about tension. Maybe this was some weird new team-building exercise that HR had implemented. Maybe I was having a stroke and hallucinating the whole thing. But then Lydia tilted her head back and laughed. That same laugh she used when she was genuinely amused. The one I hadn't heard directed at me in about 6 months. And Damien leaned down and whispered something in her ear that made her smile in a way that sent my coffee cup crashing to the floor. "You've got to be kidding me," I said out loud to my empty office, because apparently I'd become the kind of person who narrates their own psychological breakdown. I should have stopped watching right then. Any sane person would have closed the laptop, called a lawyer, and started planning their exit strategy. But I'm not a particularly sane person, especially not at 7:30 in the morning while watching my marriage disintegrate in high definition. So I kept watching like some kind of masochist who'd forgotten how to protect his own mental health. Damien's hands moved from her shoulders down her arms in a way that was unmistakably intimate. Lydia reached up and put her hand over his, her wedding ring, the one I'd spent 3 months' salary on, catching the overhead light like it was mocking me specifically. They weren't discussing quarterly reports or employee retention strategies. This wasn't a late-night work session about budget allocations or performance reviews. This was my wife and my assistant having what could only be described as a hands-on meeting in my office, in my chair, probably breathing my air and definitely destroying my faith in humanity. The video was 4 minutes and 37 seconds long. I know because I watched the timestamp tick by like I was watching a bomb countdown in an action movie, except the bomb was my marriage and the explosion was going to be my emotional stability. At the 2-minute mark, Lydia stood up and Damien pulled her closer, and that's when I hit pause so hard I nearly broke my spacebar. My hands were shaking. My coffee was all over the floor, creating a puddle that looked like a modern art installation titled, "Man Discovers He's an Idiot." My heart was doing this weird thing where it felt like it was simultaneously racing and stopping, like it couldn't decide whether to keep me alive or just give up entirely. "Okay," I said to myself, because apparently I was fully committed to the whole talking to myself thing now. "Okay. This is fine. This is totally fine. This is just my wife having an affair with my assistant in my office after lying about a late HR meeting. This is extremely fine." The sarcasm was automatic, a defense mechanism my brain deployed when reality became too much to process straight. I rewound the video 10 seconds, purely to confirm I wasn't hallucinating, and immediately regretted it because nope, it was still happening, still real, still the worst thing I'd seen since that time I accidentally walked in on my college roommate doing things that should have required a permit. I sat there in my destroyed coffee puddle of an office, staring at the paused video on my screen, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't sadness yet. That would come later, probably around 3 a.m. for the next 6 months. It wasn't even anger, though that was warming up in the bullpen. It was this cold, clear realization that everything I'd believed about my life for the past 7 years was a carefully constructed lie, and I'd been the only one not in on the joke. The timestamp on the video said 8:47 p.m., Thursday, October 9th, 2025. The timestamp on my watch said 7:33 a.m., Friday, October 10th, 2025. In less than 12 hours, I'd gone from a happily married business owner to a man watching his wife's infidelity in 4K resolution like it was a Netflix documentary I couldn't pause. And the worst part? They had no idea I knew. Lydia was probably in her office right now, planning her day, drinking her overpriced latte, completely unaware that I'd just stumbled onto footage that would make a divorce lawyer weep with joy. I closed the laptop, stood up, and looked at my reflection in the darkened screen. "Well, Graham," I said to myself, "this is going to be one hell of a Friday." You know that moment in horror movies where the protagonist hears a weird noise in the basement and instead of doing the smart thing, like leaving the house, calling the cops, or literally anything that doesn't involve investigating, they grab a flashlight and walk directly toward their own demise? That's exactly what I did. Except my basement was a computer screen and my flashlight was the replay button. I sat back down in my coffee-soaked chair, opened the laptop again, and told myself I was just being thorough. I needed to be absolutely sure of what I'd seen before I did anything drastic, right? That's what rational people do. They gather evidence. They confirm facts. They definitely don't torture themselves by rewatching their wife's betrayal frame by frame like some kind of sadistic film critic. But hey, apparently that's where I was at in my personal development journey. The video was still paused on that moment. Lydia standing, Damien's hands on her waist, both of them frozen in a tableau that belonged in a museum exhibit titled, Reasons to Never Trust Anyone Ever Again. I took a deep breath that did absolutely nothing to calm me down and hit play. What happened next made the first viewing look like a Disney movie. Damien spun Lydia around to face him, and she had this expression I'd never seen before, or maybe I had, and just hadn't been paying attention. It was this mix of excitement and mischief, like they were teenagers sneaking around behind their parents' backs instead of two grown adults destroying a marriage in corporate real estate. She said something I couldn't hear because Victor's fancy camera system apparently didn't include audio, which was either a blessing or a curse depending on how much psychological damage I wanted to inflict on myself. Then Damien, my assistant, the guy I'd personally trained, the one I'd given a Christmas bonus to last year, leaned in and kissed my wife. Not a polite peck on the cheek. Not an accidental slip during a professional goodbye. This was a full contact, Olympic-level kiss that suggested they'd had plenty of practice and weren't particularly concerned about getting caught. My stomach lurched like I was on a roller coaster designed by someone who hated humanity. I reached for my coffee and remembered I'd already spilled it, which was probably for the best because I would have absolutely thrown up in it. Okay, that's enough, I muttered, reaching for the mouse to close the window. But my hand hovered there like it was controlled by some masochistic puppet master who thought I hadn't suffered enough. And like an idiot, a complete and total idiot who apparently enjoyed emotional self-harm, I didn't close it. Instead, I maximized the window to full screen because why not get the complete cinematic experience of my life falling apart? The detail was extraordinary, really. Victor had done too good a job. I could see everything. The way Lydia's fingers gripped the back of Damien's neck, the way he pushed her back against my desk, the one I'd eaten lunch at earlier that day. The way her wedding ring glinted in the fluorescent office lighting like it was actively participating in the betrayal. I could even see the motivational poster on the wall behind them, the one that said "Success is a team effort" in big inspirational letters. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were definitely teaming up, just not in the way corporate America intended. I should mention that my office had pretty standard furniture, desk, 2 chairs for clients, a small couch by the window that I used for reading contracts. That couch, I realized with growing horror, was about to become significantly less innocent. Lydia pulled Damien toward it, and that's when I actually said no out loud like I was watching a character in a horror movie make a terrible decision. Except the characters were real and the movie was my life. They sat down on the couch, and I'm not going to describe in detail what happened next because I value what's left of my sanity and also because this isn't that kind of story. Let's just say that the late HR meeting Lydia had mentioned wasn't about budget discussions or employee evaluations. Unless employee evaluation was some kind of euphemism I'd been too faithful to understand, in which case Damien was apparently getting a very thorough performance review. I watched for maybe 30 more seconds, 30 seconds that felt like 30 years, before I finally found the willpower to hit pause again. The timestamp read 8:49 p.m. The video had a total runtime of 4 minutes and 37 seconds, which meant I still had over 2 minutes of footage left. 2 minutes I absolutely did not need to see. Why did I hire Victor? I asked the empty office. Why did he have to be so damn good at his job? Couldn't he have installed cameras that were slightly blurry? Or maybe just pointed at the ceiling? Would that have been so hard? But no. Victor had given us crystal clear HD surveillance with night vision capabilities and motion detection, because the universe apparently thought I needed to see my marriage implode with absolute clarity. Thanks, Victor. Really appreciate the attention to detail, buddy. I minimized the window, then immediately maximized it again like some kind of psychological yo-yo. My brain couldn't decide whether it wanted to see more or pretend the whole thing never happened. The problem was, I couldn't unsee what I'd already seen. That image was burned into my retinas like I'd stared at the sun, except the sun was my wife cheating on me, and the warmth was actually the cold, creeping realization that I'd been living a lie. The rational part of my brain, the tiny part that wasn't currently screaming, started making calculations. If this video was from last night at 8:47 p.m., how long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Had every late meeting been code for hooking up with my assistant? How many times had she kissed me goodbye before going off to do this? How many times had Damien looked me in the eye and said, "Yes, sir," and right away, "Boss," while secretly sleeping with my wife? I felt like I was in one of those optical illusion pictures where once you see the hidden image, you can't unsee it, and suddenly every interaction I'd had with both of them for the past 8 months was taking on a whole new, nauseating meaning. That time Lydia suggested I take Damien to the Henderson client meeting because she thought he needed the experience? That time Damien volunteered to help Lydia reorganize the HR files on a Saturday? That time I came back from lunch early and found them both in the break room laughing about something they immediately stopped talking about when I walked in? "You absolute idiot, Graham," I said, and I meant it. All the signs had been there, lit up like a Vegas strip, and I'd been too trusting or too stupid or too busy with quarterly reports to notice. I scrolled back to the beginning of the video, back to that moment when it was just Lydia sitting in my chair looking relaxed and Damien standing behind her. They looked comfortable together, familiar. This wasn't their first time doing this. You don't get that comfortable with someone overnight. This had been going on for a while, and I'd been the oblivious husband working late while they were apparently working each other. The anger was starting to build now, replacing the shock with something hotter and more dangerous. I could feel it rising in my chest like heartburn, except heartburn doesn't make you want to burn down everything you've built over the past 7 years. My hands clenched into fists, and I had this sudden urge to punch something, preferably Damien's face or maybe just a wall, because walls don't require bail money. But underneath the anger was something worse, humiliation. Pure, unfiltered embarrassment at being the guy who didn't know. The sucker. The fool. I was the punchline to a joke everyone else had been in on, and the worst part was, they were probably still laughing. Lydia was probably in her office right now, planning her day, maybe even texting Damien about when they could meet up next, completely unaware that I'd stumbled onto their little production. I checked the motion detection log again. There were more clips from other nights, September 28th, October 2nd, October 5th. They'd been using my office like it was their personal hotel room, and I'd been none the wiser because the cameras were supposedly broken. Lydia had been the one pushing to delay the repairs. Lydia had been the one saying it wasn't a priority. Of course she had. She'd been protecting her affair, making sure there was no evidence. No way for me to accidentally discover what was happening after hours. And it would have worked too, if I hadn't gone behind her back and hired Victor. "Thank you, Victor," I whispered to the empty office, and I actually meant it this time. "Thank you for being good at your job. Thank you for installing cameras that work. Thank you for accidentally giving me the evidence I'll need to burn this whole thing down." I finally closed the laptop, unable to watch another second. My hands were still shaking, my coffee was still decorating the floor, and somewhere in this building were two people who had no idea their world was about to end. I looked at the clock. 7:52 a.m. In about 8 minutes, people would start arriving for work. Lydia would probably show up around 8:30 with her latte and her lies. Damien would bounce in with his eager smile and his complete lack of shame, and I would have to look at both of them and pretend I didn't know. At least, for now. I spent the next few minutes sitting in my office like a defendant waiting for a verdict, except I was the judge, jury, and executioner all rolled into one extremely caffeinated package. My brain was running through about 17 different scenarios simultaneously. Everything from walking out and never coming back to hiring a skywriter to spell out, "My wife is cheating on me," over downtown Seattle. Neither option seemed particularly productive, but they were definitely more appealing than what I was about to do, which was absolutely nothing. Well, not nothing exactly. I was going to sit here and watch them walk in like everything was normal, like they hadn't spent last night treating my office furniture like props in their own personal soap opera. I was going to smile and nod and pretend I didn't know, because the thing about having nuclear-level evidence is that you don't just casually drop it at 8 in the morning. You wait. You plan. You make sure that when the bomb goes off, the blast radius is exactly what you intended. At least, that's what I told myself while I cleaned up the coffee spill with paper towels from my desk drawer, trying to look like a functioning human being instead of a man whose marriage had just been murdered in high definition. I pulled up my email and attempted to respond to some messages, but every sentence I typed came out wrong. Dear Mr. Patterson, thank you for your inquiry about our Q4 projections, which are looking great unlike my marriage, which is a dumpster fire. Delete. Hi, Janet. Yes, I can attend the budget meeting on Tuesday, assuming I haven't driven my car off a cliff by then. Delete. Good morning, team. Just a reminder that our quarterly review is coming up, and also trust no one because everyone is a lying snake person. Delete, delete, delete. This was going to be harder than I thought. At 8:07, I heard voices in the hallway. Early arrivals, probably the accounting team because they were always weirdly punctual. I straightened my tie, took a breath that did absolutely nothing to steady my nerves, and pulled up a spreadsheet on my computer so I'd look busy and normal and definitely not like someone who'd just discovered his entire life was a carefully orchestrated lie. At 8:23, I heard her laugh. Lydia's laugh carried down the hallway like a warning siren, except instead of alerting me to danger, it was just reminding me that danger was already here and had been sleeping in my bed for 7 years. I gripped the edge of my desk hard enough to leave marks, forced my face into something resembling neutral, and waited. She appeared in my doorway at 8:26, looking exactly like she always did, put together, professional, like a woman who definitely hadn't spent last night doing extremely unprofessional things with my employee. She was wearing a charcoal gray dress today, her hair pulled back in that sleek ponytail she favored for serious meeting days, and carrying her signature leather portfolio that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. Morning, honey, she said brightly, like we were starring in a commercial for successful marriages and not a true crime documentary. You're here early. Couldn't sleep? The audacity. The absolute audacity of this woman to stand in my doorway and call me honey, while the footage of her betrayal was literally saved on my computer maybe 15 feet away from where she was standing. Oh, you know me, I said, and I was genuinely impressed by how normal my voice sounded. Just wanted to get a head start on the Patterson proposal. Busy day ahead. That's my Graham, she said, smiling. Always so dedicated. Dedicated. Right. I was dedicated. I was so dedicated that I'd stayed late hundreds of nights working on proposals and budgets and client presentations while she was apparently dedicating herself to my assistant. The irony was so thick I could have served it at a dinner party. How was your meeting last night? I asked, because apparently I was a masochist who enjoyed inflicting psychological damage on myself. You said it ran late? Oh God, it was exhausting, she said, and she actually had the nerve to look tired, like lying was such hard work. We didn't wrap up until almost 10. Budget discussions with the senior staff. You know how Dale gets about allocation numbers. He wanted to debate every line item. Dale. She was blaming Dale, our CFO, who was probably at home last night watching Netflix with his wife like a normal person who didn't use budget meetings as cover stories for affairs. Poor Dale, getting dragged into this narrative without even knowing it. Sounds rough, I managed. It was. But hey, that's the job, right? She checked her watch. I've got a 9 o'clock with the new hires for orientation. Should be done by 10:30 if you need me for anything. I'll manage, I said, and that might have been the most honest thing I'd said all morning. She blew me a kiss, an actual kiss, with her hand and everything, and disappeared down the hallway, probably toward her office where she'd spend the next hour doing whatever HR directors do when they're not systematically destroying their marriages. I sat there for exactly 45 seconds, staring at the spot where she'd been standing, wondering if I'd imagined the entire conversation. Maybe I was having some kind of psychotic break. Maybe the video wasn't real. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at my desk, and this was all just an incredibly specific nightmare brought on by too much coffee and not enough therapy. Then Damien walked in, and all those maybes evaporated like my faith in humanity. "Morning, boss," he said with that puppy dog enthusiasm that I'd previously found endearing and now found absolutely enraging. He was wearing khakis and a blue button-down, his hair styled in that deliberately messy way that probably took him 20 minutes to achieve, looking like every generic assistant in every generic office in America. Except generic assistants don't typically sleep with their boss's wife, so Damien was special in the worst possible way. "Morning, Damien," I said, and it took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to follow it up with "you home-wrecking little snake." "Your 9 o'clock rescheduled to next week," he said, checking his tablet like everything was normal. "I moved the Henderson call to 2 p.m., and the Fletcher files are ready for your review. Oh, and Lydia asked me to remind you about the budget meeting on Tuesday. She wants to make sure you've reviewed the Q4 projections before then." Lydia asked him. Of course she did. They were probably coordinating schedules, making sure they had plenty of opportunities to sneak around behind my back. I wondered if they texted each other in some kind of code. Budget meeting probably meant, let's use Graham's office again. Q4 projections probably translated to where that cologne I like. My eye twitched. I felt it twitch, this involuntary spasm that I couldn't control, and I'm pretty sure if I'd had electrodes attached to my head, I could have powered the entire building with the rage currently surging through my nervous system. "Boss, you okay?" Damien asked, and he actually looked concerned, like he cared about my well-being. Like he hadn't spent last night doing things with my wife that definitely violated his employment contract and possibly several commandments. "I'm fine," I said through teeth that were clenched so tight I was surprised they didn't shatter. "Just tired. Didn't sleep well." "Yeah, you look tense," he said, and I swear to God, if I'd been a cartoon character, steam would have been coming out of my ears. "You should take a break. Maybe go for a walk or something. Clear your head." Clear my head. Excellent advice from the guy who'd been clearing my wife's schedule for extracurricular activities. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. He stood there for another moment, probably waiting for additional instructions, or maybe just enjoying the view of a man slowly losing his mind, before adding, "Oh, and Lydia wanted me to grab her some coffee. The good stuff from that place on 5th. You want anything?" They were getting coffee together. They were coordinating coffee runs. This was a whole operation, a well-oiled machine of deception and betrayal with caffeine breaks built in. "I'm good," I said, gesturing to the empty mug on my desk that still smelled like the coffee I'd spilled all over my floor during my earlier mental breakdown. "Already had some." Cool. "I'll be back in like 20 minutes. He started to leave, then turned back with that smile that I now recognized as the smile of someone who was definitely sleeping with my wife. "By the way, boss, I just wanted to say thanks again for giving me this opportunity. Working here has been amazing. You and Lydia have built something really special." Something special. We'd built something special, and he'd been taking it for a test drive without permission. "Glad you're enjoying it, Damien," I said, and the sarcasm in my voice was apparently too subtle for him to detect because he just grinned and walked out. I watched him disappear down the hallway, probably off to buy my wife her favorite overpriced latte, and I realized something important. I couldn't do this. I couldn't sit here and play normal for another hour, let alone another day. The performance was going to crack, probably in the next 30 minutes, and when it did, I was either going to say something I'd regret or throw my computer through the window. I pulled my phone out and stared at it, trying to decide what to do next. Call a lawyer? Call my business partner Richard and tell him his co-owner's marriage was imploding? Call a therapist and schedule an emergency session to discuss why I kept rewatching footage of my own betrayal? Instead, I opened my email and typed a message to the entire management team with a subject line that read, "Emergency team meeting, 10 a.m., mandatory attendance." If they wanted to play games, fine. But I was about to change the rules, flip the board, and light the whole thing on fire. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. You know what's funny about corporate America? We use meetings to solve everything. Bad quarter? Meeting. Employee conflicts? Meeting. Company restructuring? Meeting. Wife cheating on you with your assistant in your own office? Well, that definitely calls for a meeting. I sent that email at 8:47. Ironic timing considering that was the exact minute Lydia and Damien had started their performance last night. And spent the next hour and 13 minutes preparing for what would either be the most satisfying moment of my professional life or a spectacular act of career suicide. Honestly, I was fine with either outcome at this point. The conference room on the third floor was our biggest one, the kind with a long mahogany table that was supposed to make us look successful and a projector screen that we used for PowerPoint presentations that nobody ever actually paid attention to. I'd booked it for the entire morning, locked the door behind me, and started setting up my laptop like I was preparing a TED Talk on the subject of how to destroy your cheating wife's life in 20 minutes or less. Getting the video file ready was easier than I expected. Victor's security system had this convenient export feature that let you save clips directly to your hard drive. I'd already downloaded last night's highlight reel, all 4 minutes and 37 seconds of it, and loaded it into the presentation software. The thumbnail image was paused on a particularly damning moment. Lydia sitting in my office chair with Damien's hands on her shoulders, both of them smiling like they'd just won the lottery instead of destroying a marriage. I titled the presentation Company Ethics and Workplace Conduct Review because I'm petty and also because the irony was too perfect to resist. At 9:52, people started arriving. First was Richard, my business partner, looking confused because I hadn't given him any heads up about this meeting. Richard was a good guy, late 40s, sensible, the kind of person who actually read the employee handbook and remembered birthdays. He'd been instrumental in building Harper and Holt into what it was today, and I felt genuinely bad that he was about to witness what I was about to do. "Graham, what's this about?" he asked, settling into a chair near the head of the table. "Your email just said mandatory attendance. Is everything okay?" "Define okay," I said, which probably should have been his first warning sign that this wasn't a normal meeting. Next came Dale from accounting, then Jennifer from marketing, then the rest of the management team, about 12 people total, all looking varying degrees of confused and concerned. Sarah from operations actually brought her coffee and a notepad, ready to take minutes like this was a legitimate business meeting and not a public execution. At 9:58, Lydia walked in, still looking polished and professional in her charcoal dress, completely unaware that she was about to become the star of a screening she definitely hadn't auditioned for. She caught my eye and smiled, then took a seat in the middle of the table like she belonged there, like she hadn't spent last night doing things that would violate at least 7 company policies. "Morning, everyone," she said brightly. "Graham, I have that HR orientation at 10:30, so if we could keep this under 30 minutes, that would be great." "Oh, don't worry," I said, and my smile probably looked slightly unhinged because Richard gave me a weird look. "This won't take long at all." At 10:01, Damien rushed in looking apologetic, carrying Lydia's coffee from that expensive place on 5th. He handed it to her with a quick, "Sorry I'm late," that made my eye twitch again, then took a seat right next to her because apparently they weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. I waited until 10:03 to make sure everyone had arrived, then stood up and moved to the front of the room where the projector screen hung on the wall like a blank canvas waiting to become a crime scene. "Thanks for coming on short notice," I started, trying to keep my voice steady and professional. "I know you're all busy, so I'll get right to the point. We're here to discuss company ethics and workplace conduct." A few people exchanged glances. Jennifer from marketing looked suspicious. She was sharp, probably already sensing that something was off. Dale looked bored, which was his default expression for any meeting that didn't involve spreadsheets. Lydia looked calm, maybe even slightly annoyed that I was taking up her valuable time with something as mundane as ethics. "As you all know," I continued, "we've had some security camera issues over the past few weeks. Cameras were down, footage wasn't being recorded, and honestly, it created a bit of a security concern." Lydia shifted in her seat. Just slightly, but I noticed. She was probably wondering where this was going, maybe starting to feel that little tingle of worry that people get when they realize they might have made a catastrophic mistake. "Well, I'm happy to report that the cameras are now fully operational," I said, and I saw Lydia's face go just a shade paler. "In fact, they've been operational for about 3 weeks now. Crystal clear HD footage, night vision, motion detection, the works. Our technician, Victor, did an amazing job." The room was quiet. People were nodding politely, probably wondering why I'd called an emergency meeting to discuss security cameras. Richard was looking at me like he was trying to figure out if I'd had a mental breakdown. He wasn't wrong. "Now, the interesting thing about having functioning security cameras," I continued, moving toward my laptop, "is that you get to see what really happens in the office after hours. Who's working late, who's dedicated to their job, Who's using company property for? Let's call them non-work-related activities. Lydia's hand, the one holding her expensive latte, started trembling. Just a little. Just enough that coffee sloshed dangerously close to the rim of the cup. Damien, meanwhile, had gone completely still, like a rabbit that just spotted a wolf and was hoping immobility would somehow save it. So I thought, I said, reaching for the laptop, that we should all watch some of this footage together. You know, as a team, really get a sense of what's happening in our workplace when we think nobody's watching. Graham, Lydia said, and her voice had this edge to it that I'd heard before, usually right before she told me I was being unreasonable about something. I'm not sure this is. Oh, I'm very sure, I interrupted, and I clicked the mouse. The projector hummed to life, and suddenly there it was, displayed on a 6-foot screen for everyone to see. My office, last night, 8:47 p.m., starring Lydia Cole and Damien Foster in a production I was now calling Reasons I'm Filing for Divorce. The silence in that room was spectacular. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a bomb goes off, or right after someone's world completely shatters. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. We all just watched as on-screen Lydia laughed at something on-screen Damien said, as he put his hands on her shoulders, as she reached up and touched his hand with hers. Jesus Christ, Richard whispered, and I'd never heard him curse in the 7 years I'd known him. I let it play for maybe 15 seconds, just enough to establish what was happening, just enough to remove any possibility of misinterpretation, but not so long that we crossed into territory that would require an HR investigation. Then I paused it, right on that moment where Lydia was standing and Damien was pulling her closer. So, I said, turning to face the room, let's talk about company ethics. Lydia had gone from pale to completely white, like someone had drained all the blood from her face and replaced it with pure panic. She tried to stand, but her legs apparently weren't cooperating. You can't. This is a violation of privacy. I finished for her. Actually, no. These cameras are legally installed on company property, in company spaces, and according to our employee handbook, which you wrote, Lydia, so you should know this. All areas of the building except bathrooms and changing rooms are subject to surveillance. Page 47, Section 12, Subsection C. I checked this morning. Damien looked like he was about to throw up, which was honestly the most relatable thing he'd done all day. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish trying to figure out how to breathe on land. Is this? Jennifer from marketing started, then stopped, probably realizing there was no polite way to finish that question. Is this my wife having an affair with my personal assistant in my office? I supplied helpfully. Yes it is. Glad we're all on the same page. Dale from accounting, God bless him, actually pulled out his phone and started taking notes like this was a normal meeting and he was documenting action items. Should I be recording this in the minutes? He asked seriously. Absolutely, I said. Mark it down as major breach of company ethics policies and reasons the HR director will be updating her resume. Lydia finally found her voice, and it came out sharp and defensive, exactly like I knew it would. You had no right to show this. You're making a scene. This is unprofessional and unprofessional. I laughed, and it sounded slightly unhinged even to my own ears. Lady, you turned my assistant into an unpaid actor in our marriage's sequel, and you're calling me unprofessional? I'm not the one who used late HR meeting as code for hookup session in my husband's office. Sarah from operations, bless her heart, actually clapped. Just once, quickly, before catching herself and looking embarrassed. But I saw it, and honestly, it made me feel slightly better about the whole situation. Graham, Richard said carefully, standing up like he was approaching a wild animal. Maybe we should discuss this privately, not in front of the entire management team. Why? I asked genuinely. They were going to find out eventually. Might as well rip the Band-Aid off now. Plus, Lydia's always talking about transparency and leadership. Consider this my contribution to transparent management practices. Lydia stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Her face had gone from white to red, anger finally overtaking the panic. You're being childish. You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing all of us. Oh, I'm embarrassing? I gestured to the paused screen. I'm not the one who got caught on camera treating company furniture like a prop in my personal life drama. That's all you, sweetheart. Damien finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant. Save it, I cut him off. Your apology means about as much as your employee loyalty, which is apparently worth less than whatever my wife was offering you for participating in this little arrangement. The room had devolved into chaos now. People were whispering to each other. Some were staring at Lydia and Damien like they'd grown extra heads, and Richard was standing there looking like he'd just watched his entire company implode in real time. Which, to be fair, he kind of had. The beautiful thing about publicly detonating someone's life is watching them scramble to pick up the pieces while everyone else just stares. It's like witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Except the car is your marriage and the crash is happening in a conference room with fluorescent lighting and stale bagels that nobody's touching because they're too busy watching the show. Lydia was standing now, gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright, her face cycling through emotions faster than a slot machine. Shock, anger, humiliation, more anger, then landing on what I can only describe as desperate damage control mode. This is a misunderstanding, she said, and I had to give her credit for trying. Her voice was shaking, but she was going for authoritative, like if she just said it confidently enough, everyone would forget what they'd just witnessed on a 6-foot screen in high definition. That footage, it's taken out of context. Damien and I were discussing. Discussing what exactly? I interrupted, because I wasn't about to let her spin this into some kind of innocent misunderstanding. Ergonomic office chair positions? The best techniques for team building? How to completely destroy someone's trust while maintaining excellent posture. Jennifer from marketing let out a snort that she tried to cover with a cough. She failed. The sound echoed in the silent room like a gunshot, and I saw at least 3 other people fighting smiles. This was terrible. This was a corporate nightmare. This was also, apparently, the most entertaining thing that had happened at Harper and Holt Consulting since Gerald from IT accidentally replied all to a company email with a cat meme. Graham, Lydia said, and her voice had gone from authoritative to pleading, which was a tone I'd heard before, but never in front of 12 witnesses. Can we please discuss this privately? This doesn't need to be public. I finished. You're right. It didn't need to be public. But then again, your affair didn't need to happen in my office, on company time, using company furniture. So I guess we're both making questionable choices today. Damien had his head in his hands now, and I almost felt bad for him. Almost. He was 26 years old, fresh out of business school, probably thought he was being so clever sneaking around with the boss's wife. Never occurred to him that security cameras might actually work, or that his boss might not be as oblivious as he looked. Youth is wasted on the stupid, as they say. Lydia started again, then stopped, her brain apparently short-circuiting as it tried to find a way out of this that didn't exist. You weren't supposed to see that. The room went even quieter, which I didn't think was possible. That's the thing about the truth. Sometimes it just slips out when you're panicking, and suddenly everyone knows exactly what you meant to keep hidden. Well, no kidding, I said, and I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice if I tried. I wasn't supposed to see that. I also wasn't supposed to find out my wife was cheating on me, and I definitely wasn't supposed to discover that my personal assistant was moonlighting as my marriage counselor's worst nightmare. But here we are, living in a world where security cameras work and Victor does excellent installations. Richard cleared his throat, which is what Richard did when he was uncomfortable and trying to be diplomatic. Graham, I think maybe we should adjourn this meeting and what? I turned to him, and I could feel 7 years of partnership in my voice. Pretend this didn't happen? Go back to our offices and act like everything's normal? Richard, my wife just got caught on camera having an affair with my assistant in my office. There is no, and that makes this better. The meeting happened. The footage exists. We're all standing here in this room together, and we all saw the same thing. I was comforting him, Lydia said suddenly, desperately, like she'd just found a life raft in the middle of the ocean. Damien was going through a difficult time. He was stressed about his performance review, and I was helping him. Oh my God, I said, and I actually laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had officially run out of patience for bullshit. You're really going with that? You were comforting him? With aromatherapy and full contact hugs? Is that what we're calling it now? Sarah from operations had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. Dale was still taking notes on his phone, because apparently nothing Not even watching his co-worker's marriage implode was going to stop him from documenting this meeting. Jennifer looked like she was watching her favorite reality TV show, completely invested in every moment. It was a mistake, Damien said quietly, still not looking up from his hands. It was stupid. It shouldn't have happened. You're right, I agreed. It shouldn't have happened. A lot of things shouldn't have happened. I shouldn't have trusted you to organize my schedule while you were apparently also organizing private meetings with my wife. I shouldn't have given you a Christmas bonus last year. I shouldn't have recommended you for that training program in Portland. But mostly, you shouldn't have slept with my wife in my office like you were starring in the world's worst porno. Graham, Lydia snapped, and there was the anger I'd been waiting for. The real Lydia, the one who showed up when things didn't go her way. You're being immature. You're being vindictive. This whole display is beneath you. Immature, I repeated, and I felt something shift inside me, from anger to something colder and clearer. You know what's immature, Lydia? Having an affair with your husband's assistant. You know what's vindictive? Lying about late meetings while you're using his office as your personal love nest. And you know what's beneath me? Apparently, being married to someone who thinks HR meeting is code for horizontal refreshments. Richard made a strangled sound. I think it might have been a suppressed laugh, but he covered it well. I want to leave, Lydia said, moving toward the door. I'm not staying here to be humiliated. Too late, I said cheerfully. The humiliation already happened. You're standing in a room full of your colleagues after they just watched footage of you cheating on your husband. You can leave, but the humiliation's coming with you. It's like a party favor, except instead of a little bag of mints, you get to carry around the knowledge that everyone here knows exactly what kind of person you are. She stopped at the door, her hand on the handle, and turned back to look at me. For a second, just a second, I saw something in her face that might have been genuine remorse. Or maybe it was just more panic. I honestly couldn't tell anymore, and I wasn't sure I cared. You're going to regret this, she said quietly. Probably, I agreed. But right now? Right now I regret marrying you more. She left. The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the framed motivational posters on the wall, and suddenly there were only 11 people in the room instead of 12. Damien looked like he wanted to follow her, but couldn't quite figure out how to make his legs work. Damien, I said, and my voice was surprisingly calm considering I'd just publicly destroyed 2 people's reputations in under 20 minutes. You should probably start updating your resume. Am I fired? He asked, finally looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. What do you think? I replied, you violated about 7 different company policies, destroyed any possibility of a professional working relationship, and oh yeah, slept with your boss's wife. So yes, Damien, consider yourself very, very fired. He stood up slowly, like an old man instead of a 26-year-old who'd just learned that actions have consequences. I really am sorry, he said again. I know, I said, and I meant it. But sorry doesn't unfuck my wife, does it? Sorry doesn't undo the past 8 months of lies. Sorry is just a word people say when they get caught doing something they knew was wrong the whole time. He left too, less dramatically than Lydia, but with the same defeated slouch. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, and then it was just me and the rest of the management team, all of us standing in this conference room that suddenly felt too small and too large at the same time. Well, Jennifer said after a long moment of silence. That was the most interesting team meeting we've ever had. Should I mark this as a recurring event? Dale asked seriously, his phone still out. Like, do we need to schedule follow-ups? I laughed. I actually laughed, because what else was there to do? My marriage was over, my assistant was fired, and I'd just committed what could generously be called career arson in front of my entire management team. No follow-ups needed, Dale, I said. I think we covered everything. Richard walked over and put his hand on my shoulder, which was the most physical affection he'd shown in 7 years of partnership. You okay? He asked quietly. No, I said honestly. But I will be. Eventually. After therapy. And probably a lot of bourbon. You want me to handle the paperwork? He offered. For Damien's termination, I mean. And whatever needs to happen with Lydia. That would be great, I said, suddenly feeling exhausted like I'd run a marathon, except the marathon was emotional devastation and the finish line was alcoholism. I need to call my lawyer. And maybe my therapist. Possibly both at the same time. Sarah stood up and started gathering her things, then paused. For what it's worth, Graham, I think you handled that with remarkable restraint. I would have thrown the laptop at them. The day's not over yet, I replied, and several people laughed, which felt surreal but also somehow exactly right. As everyone filed out, offering various versions of, "I'm sorry this happened," and "let us know if you need anything." I stood there in the empty conference room with my laptop still connected to the projector, the paused image of my wife's betrayal still displayed on the screen like modern art titled, "The exact moment everything fell apart." I closed the laptop, disconnected the cables, and looked around the room one more time. "Well, Victor," I said to no one, "your cameras work great. Maybe a little too great. But thanks anyway." Then I walked out, leaving the conference room and whatever remained of my old life behind me. By the time I made it back to my office, my phone had already exploded with 17 text messages, 6 missed calls, and what I can only assume were the digital equivalent of people grabbing popcorn and settling in for the drama. News traveled fast in a mid-sized consulting firm, apparently faster than the speed of light and definitely faster than my ability to process what I'd just done. I ignored all of it. The messages, the calls, the probably well-meaning but ultimately useless attempts at comfort from coworkers who 30 minutes ago didn't know my life was a dumpster fire. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for, Nora Stein, attorney at law, and the only person I knew who could turn betrayal into legally binding paperwork. Nora and I went way back. College, actually, where she'd been the terrifyingly competent president of the mock trial team, and I'd been the business major who occasionally showed up to meetings. We'd stayed in touch over the years, mostly through LinkedIn and the occasional happy hour where she'd tell war stories about contentious divorces and custody battles that made my problems seem quaint. Well, they weren't quaint anymore. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Graham Cole," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "This is either a social call, which you never make during work hours, or you need a lawyer, which means something interesting happened. I'm betting on option 2. "Nora," I said, sinking into my office chair, the same chair Lydia had been sitting in last night while Damien worked his magic or whatever the hell they were doing. I made a mental note to burn this chair later. How fast can we turn betrayal into paperwork? There was a pause. Then I heard the distinctive sound of a door closing. When Nora spoke again, her voice had shifted from friendly to business mode, which was exactly what I needed. "Faster than your wife can delete her emails." "What happened?" I gave her the abbreviated version: security cameras, surprise footage, office affair, public confrontation in a conference room with witnesses. I left out some of the more colorful language I'd used and definitely didn't mention the part where Sarah from operations had clapped, but I gave her the essentials. Nora listened without interrupting, which was one of her many talents, and when I finished, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "Do you still have the footage?" she asked. "Saved on my laptop, backed up to the cloud, and probably burned into my retinas for the rest of my natural life," I confirmed. "Perfect. Email it to me using my secure portal. I'll send you the link." "How long have you been married?" 7 years. "No kids, thank God." "Assets?" "Joint ownership of the company, the house in Queen and 2 cars, retirement accounts, savings. We have a prenup, but it's pretty basic. Mostly just protects the company in case of dissolution." I heard typing on her end. Nora was already working, already building the case before I'd even officially hired her. This is why I loved her in a purely professional, please destroy my cheating wife's life kind of way. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," she said, and I could practically hear her brain organizing everything into neat little legal boxes. "I'm going to draft divorce papers today. I can have them ready by tonight. We'll cite adultery, which thanks to your video evidence will be stupidly easy to prove. Washington is a no-fault state, but having documented proof of infidelity helps with everything else: asset division, spousal support if she tries to claim it, and general leverage." "She's going to fight this," I said, stating the obvious. "Lydia doesn't lose gracefully." "Neither do I," Nora replied, and I believed her. "Now the company. You said you're co-owners?" "With my business partner Richard Harper. It's split 3 ways. Richard has 40%, Lydia and I each have 30%. That's going to be complicated. She can't force a sale, but she can make things messy. However, if we can prove she violated company ethics policies, which it sounds like she definitely did, we might be able to leverage that into a buyout situation." Does your company have a morality clause in the ownership agreement? I pulled up the partnership documents on my computer, scanning through pages of legal jargon that I'd signed 7 years ago without really reading because I trusted everyone involved. Hindsight was 2020, and apparently I'd been operating with cataracts. Section 8, subsection 4. I read aloud. Any partner found to be in violation of company ethics policies or engaged in conduct detrimental to the company's reputation may be subject to forced buyout at fair market value, as determined by an independent assessor. Beautiful, Nora said, and she sounded genuinely delighted. That's beautiful. We can use that. The affair happened on company property, during company time, and you have video evidence. Plus, you just showed that evidence to your entire management team, which means there are witnesses to her ethics violation. She's going to have a hell of a time arguing her way out of this. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not quite relief, but close enough. For the first time since watching that video this morning, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely drowning. What about Damien? I asked. I fired him in front of everyone. Can he sue for wrongful termination? Nora laughed, which was not the reaction I expected. Let him try. You have video evidence of him engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a superior on company property. That's grounds for termination in any employee handbook I've ever seen. Plus, if he's stupid enough to sue, we'll countersue for about 17 different things and make his life so miserable he'll wish he'd just accepted the firing and moved on. You're enjoying this, I observed. I'm enjoying the legal aspects of it, she corrected. The fact that you're going through hell right now? That part sucks, and I'm sorry. But professionally speaking, this is a lawyer's dream case. Clear evidence, multiple witnesses, documented violations, and a prenup that already establishes asset protection. Graham, I could win this case in my sleep. So what happens now? Now, you send me everything. The video, copies of your ownership documents, employment contracts for both Lydia and Damien, any financial records you have access to. I'll draft the divorce papers and have a process server deliver them tonight. Where does she stay when she's not at your place? We have the house together. I don't know where she'll go after what happened today. Not your problem, Nora said firmly. In fact, I'd recommend you go home right now, pack up her essentials, and have them ready by the door. She can collect them and find somewhere else to stay. You're not obligated to house someone who betrayed you. That seems harsh, I said, though I wasn't sure why I was defending Lydia at this point. Force of habit, probably. Graham, she cheated on you in your office. Harsh is relative. Now, I'm also going to recommend we freeze joint accounts. Not empty them. Just freeze them so neither of you can drain the funds during the divorce proceedings. It's standard procedure. Do it, I said, surprising myself with how quickly I agreed. 3 hours ago, I was a married man with a stable life and a successful business. Now I was apparently the kind of person who froze bank accounts and kicked his wife out of the house. Personal growth was weird. Good. I'll file the necessary paperwork with the court today. We'll also request a temporary restraining order preventing her from accessing certain company files and systems until we can sort out the ownership situation. Can we do that? We can do a lot of things when there's video evidence of ethical violations. Trust me on this. Oh, and Graham, stop talking to her. No texts, no calls, no in-person conversations. Everything goes through me now. If she tries to contact you, ignore it or document it and send it to me. The less direct communication you have, the better. I thought about all the years we'd been together, all the conversations we'd had, all the plans we'd made. And now we were reducing it to no contact and legal documentation. It felt surreal, like I was watching my life happen to someone else. Nora, how long does this usually take? The divorce, I mean. With your evidence and a good strategy? We could have preliminary hearings within a month, settlement negotiations within 2 or 3 months. If she's smart, she'll settle quickly and avoid dragging this out. If she's stupid and vindictive, she'll fight it, and we'll destroy her in court while billing her for the privilege. And the company? That's trickier. The buyout could take 6 months to a year, depending on how complicated the valuation gets. But we'll work on getting her removed from day-to-day operations immediately. She's a liability now, and Richard will understand that. I heard clicking on her end. Probably her assistant or maybe just Nora herself, already pulling up documents and preparing for battle. The woman was a machine, a caffeine-powered legal weapon that I was incredibly grateful to have on my side. Okay, I said, feeling more exhausted than I'd ever felt in my life. Let's do this. One more thing, Nora said, and her voice softened slightly. How are you doing? Like, actually doing. It was the first time anyone had asked that question since this morning, and I wasn't prepared for how much it would hit me. I looked around my office, the same office where Lydia had betrayed me, where I'd spent countless hours building a business and a life that had apparently been built on lies. I'm furious, I admitted. I'm humiliated. I feel like an idiot for not seeing this coming. And I'm terrified that this is going to destroy everything I've built. It won't, Nora said with certainty. You'll get through this. It's going to suck for a while. It's going to suck a lot, actually. But you'll get through it. And when you do, you'll have a company that's yours, a life that's yours, and the satisfaction of knowing that you handled this with more grace than most people would have. I publicly humiliated my wife in front of the entire management team, I pointed out. After she privately humiliated you in your own office, Nora countered. Context matters. Now send me those files, go home, pack up her stuff, and try to eat something that isn't coffee or rage. I'll call you tonight with an update. Thanks, Nora. Seriously, that's what I'm here for. Oh, and Graham, welcome to the next chapter of your life. It starts with paperwork and ends with freedom. Let's get to work. She hung up, and I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. Then I opened my laptop, logged into the secure portal she'd just sent me, and started uploading files. The video, the ownership documents, employment contracts, financial records, everything that would help Nora build the case that would dismantle my marriage and hopefully save my company. By midnight, the divorce papers were drafted. By morning, Lydia's access to company systems was revoked. By noon the next day, Damien's ID badge was deactivated and his desk was empty. Nora had called it legal lightning, and she wasn't wrong. In less than 24 hours, we'd gone from evidence to action, from betrayal to battle stations. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was going to survive this. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer to the face, which was appropriate considering my life had become a demolition site. I'd spent the previous night at a hotel because going home to the house I shared with Lydia felt about as appealing as diving into a shark tank wearing a meat suit. The hotel was one of those corporate chains that all look the same. Beige walls, generic art, a bed that somehow managed to be both too soft and too hard at the same time. I'd ordered room service, drank 2 bottles of overpriced wine from the minibar, and fell asleep watching a documentary about financial fraud that hit way too close to home. When I walked into the office at 7:30, the energy was different. People were already there, way more people than should have been there that early. And they all suddenly found their shoes incredibly interesting the moment I stepped off the elevator. Word had spread, obviously. In a company of 45 employees, a public affair revelation travels faster than a viral cat video. And by now, everyone from the interns to the janitorial staff probably knew that the HR director had been playing horizontal tag with the boss's assistant. I made it to my office without making eye contact with anyone, which was a feat of social avoidance that deserved an award. My coffee from the hotel was already cold, my head was pounding from the wine, and I had 17 new emails waiting for me, most of them with subject lines that made me want to fake my own death and move to a country without extradition treaties. At 8:15, Lydia arrived. I heard her before I saw her, the distinctive click of her expensive heels on the tile floor, moving fast like she was on a mission. She went straight to her office on the 2nd floor, and I watched through my window as she tried her keycard on the door. Once, twice, 3 times, each swipe getting more aggressive, like she could force the technology to cooperate through sheer willpower. The light blinked red every single time. I'd had IT revoke her access last night at Nora's recommendation. Her keycard was now about as useful as a library card at a car dealership, decorative, but ultimately pointless. From my vantage point 3 floors up, I could see her face cycle through confusion, then disbelief, then pure rage as she realized what had happened. She pulled out her phone, probably calling IT, probably about to unleash hell on some poor technician who was just following orders. I almost felt bad for whoever answered that call. Almost. 10 minutes later, she was in the lobby, and I could hear her screaming from 3 floors up. The acoustics in our building were terrible, which meant every word echoed through the stairwell, like she was using a megaphone specifically designed to broadcast humiliation. "There's been a mistake," she shouted at someone, probably Rebecca from reception, who definitely didn't get paid enough to deal with this. "My keycard isn't working. I need access to my office immediately." I grabbed my now cold coffee and walked to the elevator, because if I was going to watch this train wreck, I might as well have a front row seat. By the time I got to the lobby, there was a small crowd gathering. Employees pretending to check the bulletin board or grab coffee from the cafe, but really just watching the show because humans are fundamentally terrible and we all love drama when it's not happening to us. Lydia saw me the moment I stepped off the elevator, and her eyes locked onto mine like a heat-seeking missile that had just found its target. "Graham," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What is going on? Why isn't my keycard working? Why can't I access my email?" I took a sip of my cold coffee, realized it tasted like regret and bad decisions, and gave her the most casual shrug I could manage. "System updates," I said simply. "You know how IT is. Always tinkering with things." Her face went from red to purple, which was a color I didn't know human skin could achieve without medical intervention. "Don't play games with me. You did this. You locked me out." "Me?" I put my hand to my chest in mock surprise. "Lydia, I'm just a humble co-owner trying to run a business. These kinds of technical decisions are way above my pay grade." "This is illegal," she hissed, moving closer, but apparently remembering we had an audience because she stopped about 5 feet away. "You can't just lock me out of my own office. I have rights. I'm a partner in this company." "Had rights," I corrected pleasantly. Past tense. "See, there's this interesting clause in our partnership agreement, Section 8, Subsection 4, if you want to look it up. Says something about partners who violate company ethics policies being subject to," what was the phrase? "Oh right, immediate suspension of access pending investigation." "There's no investigation," she practically shrieked. "Sure there is," I said. "We're investigating whether using company property for personal affairs, emphasis on affairs, constitutes an ethics violation." Spoiler alert, it does. Page 47 of the employee handbook that you wrote. The irony is really not lost on me, by the way. Gerald from IT had appeared from somewhere, looking uncomfortable in that way IT people do when forced to interact with human emotion. "Ms. Cole," he said quietly, "I've been instructed to revoke your system access until further notice. It's temporary, pending." "Pending what?" Lydia snapped at him, and Gerald actually took a step back. "Pending my husband's temper tantrum? This is ridiculous. This is policy," I interrupted, and my voice was colder than I'd intended. "You violated company ethics. You used my office for activities that definitely weren't in your job description. And now there are consequences." Novel concept, I know, but that's how the real world works. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her brain working, trying to find an angle, a way to spin this, anything that would give her back control. But there was nothing. The evidence existed. The witnesses existed. Her affair was documented in 4K resolution, and no amount of spin could change that. "You're going to regret this," she said finally, her voice dropping to something cold and threatening. "When my lawyer gets through with you." "Your lawyer can talk to my lawyer," I said, pulling out my phone and holding it up. "Nora Stein. I'll text you her number. You two should get acquainted since you'll be spending a lot of time together over the next few months." I walked past her toward the elevator, done with this conversation and done with her. As I pressed the button, I heard her say one more thing, quieter now, almost desperate. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I turned back and looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd made choices and was now facing the fallout. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy. That part was quickly overruled by the rest of me that remembered watching her betray our marriage in my own office. "Yeah," I said. "You just meant not to get caught." The elevator doors closed, and I rode back up to my office alone. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a journalist who'd somehow gotten my personal number, which was either impressive investigative work or a massive breach of privacy. Probably both. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I'm calling about the footage that's trending on social media. Do you have any comment?" I nearly dropped my phone. "I'm sorry, what footage?" "The security camera video. It's all over Twitter. Someone leaked it." My stomach dropped faster than my faith in humanity. I pulled up Twitter on my laptop, and there it was, my marriage's destruction, now with over 2 million views and climbing. Someone had edited it down to the highlights, added dramatic music, and titled it, HR Gone Wild, when office romance goes too far. The comments were exactly what you'd expect, a mix of sympathy, mockery, and people making popcorn gifs. Someone had even created a hashtag cameras don't lie. Any comment? The journalist asked again. I stared at the screen, watching the view count tick upward. Yes, I said finally. I always said our office was built on transparency. Guess I was more right than I knew. Months later, I sat in my new office. Same building, same floor, completely different locks, and a chair I'd picked out myself because the old one had way too much emotional baggage and questionable stains that I didn't want to think about. The divorce had finalized 3 weeks ago after Lydia tried every legal maneuver in the book and discovered that video evidence beats creative lawyers every single time. Nora had been ruthless, efficient, and worth every penny of her frankly astronomical hourly rate. I got the house. I got 70% of the liquid assets. Most importantly, I got Lydia's 30% stake in the company for a buyout price that made Richard whistle low and say, "Damn, Graham. Remind me never to piss off your lawyer." The morality clause had worked exactly like Nora said it would, and now Harper and Holt Consulting was mine and Richard's, split 60-40, with no HR director who moonlighted as a homewrecker. Sometimes, late at night when the office was empty and I couldn't sleep, I still pulled up that footage. Not because I enjoyed the pain. I'd had enough therapy to know that was unhealthy, but because it reminded me of something important. Every betrayal teaches you something if you're willing to learn. Mine taught me that trust needs to be earned, that security cameras are worth their weight in gold, and that late meetings should always come with verifiable meeting notes. Lydia had gone into hiding after the footage went viral, deleting all her social media and apparently moving to Portland or Phoenix or somewhere that started with P and wasn't Seattle. I heard through the office gossip chain, because some things never change, that she'd taken a job at a small firm doing HR consulting, which seemed like a spectacularly bad career choice for someone whose face was permanently associated with workplace ethics violations. Damien had sent me a Christmas card last month. Just a generic one from Hallmark that said, "Wishing you peace and happiness," with a handwritten note inside. No hard feelings. I've learned from my mistakes. I'd replied by mailing him a USB drive in a padded envelope with a label that read, "Never forget," and nothing else. Petty? Absolutely. Satisfying. More than it should have been. These days I started every morning the same way. Coffee, confidence, and a quick check of the security camera feeds, because once you've been burned, you learn to appreciate good surveillance. The cameras were always rolling now, capturing everything in perfect HD clarity. Because in life and in business, the moment you stop watching is the moment someone decides to audition for the wrong role.